Good morning, and thank you for joining us today at our event, Bridging the Gap Between Design and Build. At this event, we hope to address some of the key issues that occur because of this void and understand how the industry can overcome this gap of information by speaking with some of the leading voices in the build environment. Joining us today, we have Luke Horton, who's the Sales Director at Sapphire Balconies, Ken Farnan, who's the Director at Cooley's, Katie Collins, the Senior Account Executive from 3Kit, Tony Ball, Managing Director at C3 Alliance, Ryan Milliken, Estimating Manager at FP McCann, and Matthew Bennett, who's the Head of Innovation and Strategy at Wilmot Dixon. During the day, you can use the Slido link below to ask any questions to the panel, and then we will pose them to them during the live Q&A at 1 o'clock. I'd now like to introduce Luke Horton, the Sales Director from Sapphire Balconies.
Welcome, Luke. Would you like to start off just introducing who you are and what your role is?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I work for Sapphire Balconies as the Managing Director. I've been with the business since 2006. Probably goes without saying what the role is to drive the business forward.
Glad to have you on board the panel, and we'll be looking forward to introducing you with the other panel members on the day. The thing we're looking at is the gap between design and construction. Could we just start off, what's your take on what this gap actually is? We talk about gap, what is it, Luke?
Interesting question. Yeah, there's definitely is a gap, isn't there, between the architects and designers for projects and the actual companies that build these, as well as the investors really that are there, turning this development into a return on investment in most cases. I think the gap is a number of areas really. There's a gap. One would be, I think the brief for the architects is to come up with the scheme, isn't it? Come up with a concept. They've got to meet planning briefs. They've got to meet the brief from the client and their aspirations. And then you've got the builders themselves who actually are trying to work to a budget to generate the profit they need on the scheme. And you've got really, I think, a gap in actually tools and information available to both those parties at the early stages of a project, at the conceptual stage. The architects don't have a way of costing their design necessarily as they're working it up from a blank sheet of paper, so to speak. And likewise, the main contractors and developers and people that might be involved from a point of view of building the project and delivering the project don't have an accurate way really either of knowing, based on limited details at planning stages, what something's going to cost. So I think there's a real gap there in information and tools and really how to achieve both the aspirations for design and the aspirations for the builder and investors.
So one of the things we're seeing quite common in the marketplace is people turning to a more rationalising, if you like, and restricting the options, because then people become more familiar and there's less of a gap. Do you think that's the best route, the only route, or is there another alternative?
It is a route, isn't it? And we're seeing a number of companies, the buzzword at the moment is playbooks or product books, and see a lot of companies trying to limit down, for example, the number of choices they might have for kitchens or for balconies and other trades like that, to try and come up with 2 or 3 details for their projects. And what you see there is obviously it's quite a limiting approach, because if you're not careful, certainly with a product like balconies that's on the outside of the building and is a very visual product that has a first impact on the appearance of the building, is you can tend to find your different blocks in different developments all looking very similar, because the choice is so restricted to architects, even though it does make the buildability easier and maybe the cost planning side easier. So in my view, that achieves one party's aspirations but not the others. And I don't think it is the only way or the best way necessarily. I think there's intelligent solutions such as can be developed in configurators and software that can both do the design job without restricting choices, still give a wide range of choice, but also help to cost design by the minute as it's as the design's worked out. So there's some interesting new technology out there that's, I think, a new way forward for the industry.
Thanks, Luke. And we'll be exploring more of this as we go through the panel discussion shortly. For those of you who haven't yet booked up, go to www.resi.build to book your place. And on that panel, we'll be looking from a wide range from main contractors, tier one main contractors, through to supply chain consultants and people within the supply chain to actually look at the options and discuss the different ways of achieving collaboration which works for each of those parties. So thanks very much, Luke, for your input, and we look forward to having you on the panel fairly shortly.
Yeah, look forward to seeing you in the audience there.
Thank you, Luke, for joining us today. Like I said before, if you do have any questions for Luke, please do use the Slido link below. I'd now like to introduce Ken Farnan. Ken's the director at Cooley's.
Good morning. My name is Ken Farnan. I'm the construction director for a company called Cooley Construction Services. We specialise in project management, construction management, and cost consultancy, as well as modern methods of construction strategies for not just the construction industry, but also for clients and developers of residential through to commercial and education buildings.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Ken. We're glad to have you on board. And we're looking at the whole conversation about bridging this gap between the kind of what's initially designed and planned into building through to what is actually delivered. And one of the things which keeps coming up is the conversation of collaboration, how you involve your supply chain. One of the first questions we'd like to put to you, Ken, is how can a supply chain work collaboratively with a company like yourself to address that gap, or what might be described as a gap in that information, or make it seamless, if you like?
There is a gap, and it's quite a noticeable gap. And I think it's critical that developers and clients understand what the benefits of early engagement of specialist supply chain and manufacturers bring to the whole of the design process. I think if you start engaging at the early start of rebate 3, they can, the specialist suppliers and manufacturers can be fully engaged in the process. This means that the component parts of the building are not designed in isolation. What we tend to see is that specialists go off and design their element within certain parameters. We can get rid of those. We can get rid of the zones that they design in and get down to the specifics. The team can coordinate at an earlier stage. It helps mitigate redesign at a later date in the process. I think all too often we're seeing architects attempting a design without specialist engagement. We then get to REBA 4, where we need to get that engagement, and you go back through a complete redesign process. Now, that redesign process sometimes can outweigh the benefits of value opportunities that the specialists can bring. So if we bring everybody in early, working in a collaborative fashion, we get a much more robust design that we can cost and value. And I think it's much more beneficial to the client in the long run. I think expertise is somewhat lost on architectural practices. They've lost that specialist knowledge, and they rely heavily on the manufacturers and the supply chain. We need to bring them on the journey. It just can't be a one-stage process.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. And so the thing you're talking there is about kind of the cost avoidance early on, and that whole shortening that process of collaboration, because it happens anyway, but at a later stage. So in terms of the barriers, why is it we're in a situation where we have got a gap?
I think the first thing that we need is a clear and concise brief from the client from the onset. And once that is known, then we can establish the team. I think once the team's established, then we look at what are the barriers to that collaboration. I think one of the main barriers is how we procure projects. And it's often overlooked. If we look at what's the main most popular procurement route, is design and build lump sum fixed price. That is the most popular at the moment. Then it's probably followed by two-stage lump sum D&B. If you look at alternatives, what are the alternatives in terms of procurement routes? We've got other forms of contract that are more collaborative. PPC 2000. The American forms of contract, which are integrated project delivery, where everybody has a vested interest in the project from at the onset, from the supply chain to the manufacturers to the principal contractors. But we also have in the UK, we've got NEC3 and NEC4, which by their very nature are collaborative contracts. So I think that's the first thing we need. If we truly want a collaborative approach, we need to look at the form of contract that we're going to use. I myself favour things like construction management, where the client is still very much involved throughout the process, rather than, yes, there you go, there's a lump sum fixed price, and I want a product at the end of the day, and it's X amount of money. We also need to look at, who carries the risk. Is it shared risk? Because again, that's a big barrier to collaboration. Again, a lot of clients, they want to pass it, risk dumping is what I call it. But I think the risks sit with the client, and the client managing those, because at the end of the day, it's the client who writes the checks, who is delivering the project. So it's understanding those risks. I also think management of change is a big barrier. Throughout the construction process, even the design process through the construction process, there's a lot of change. So if we design that, if everybody's working collaboratively up front through stage 3 and stage 4, it reduces and negates the requirement to make changes at a later date. And changes a lot of the time is what causes conflict.
Whether it's perhaps change of sequence or change of product application or various different parts of the build there. But there's an interesting point you're raising there. I just want to touch on one of the points you made about the client originally really specifying the objectives and what you're trying to achieve, so you can all work towards a common interest and common goal. So are you suggesting then that there needs to be set sort of shared interests which are continually shared throughout the project, so that everyone knows that this particular project, these are the 3 key areas, or what's your thoughts on setting some clear objectives there from a client point of view?
I think so. The client, if they have a clear design brief, and that isn't just about the building during the construction, it's what does the client intend to do with that building? Is he going to maintain that building? So that has a completely different design brief, because then you're not just looking at capital costs, you're looking at whole life cycle costs. Is the client going to retain that building as an asset and sell it off at a later date to a pension fund? Again, that brings a whole different circumstance and a change of design. Or, if that's clear and everybody's clear from the onset what the intention of that building or project is for, we can design around that. And that's what brings the value to the client at the end of the day. And again, having shared interest, a little bit of pay and gain process where people are vested in that, in the whole design and the construction of it. I firmly believe if we do get supply chain engagement in very early on at the start of stage 3, they should be paid for that. It is specialist advice. So why shouldn't we be paying them as a consultant? Then we get best value. But then there's always that, well, what if we go to the market? Could we get a better price? I think we should be looking at the value rather than the cost. The value that a specialist brings to the whole process. And then you probably don't have to go down through that whole exercise, and I hate using the word, that whole value engineering exercise, because it is rationalized, because you've got the people on board to do that at the beginning. So you don't have to continuously redesign and just to meet cost expectations. They're already there.
So taking a few perhaps examples of this sort of thing then, if you're taking the approach of kind of I want to have everything so generic that anyone can price it when I go out to 10 people or whatever. That would involve a number of generic details which aren't really finalising things. Are you suggesting that you're working out what the best practice approach is to actually to build this scheme, or both from a point of view whether that's MMC or whether that's traditional build or whatever, and then working from there? Or tell us a bit more about that process and an example there, perhaps.
I think MMC is changing that, because then you can go down a more generic detailed route in terms of design. That's a really good process. But you still need a specialist, because the architectural practices do not have that knowledge, and they will have to engage, or they will either have to sub-engage someone else to support them doing that. Why not the client bring that forward and have it at the start of the process? I've used it on a number of projects, but I've used it where it's a construction management route as opposed to a design and build route, because I was representing and supporting a client, and we were seeing, it was a project in Blackfriars, very early on in the design process. We were bringing a specialist in, so specialist dry lining manufacturers, not installers, but the actual manufacturers, cladding manufacturers, and the same with the concrete frame. Brought them in at the start of stage 3 to support the structural engineer, to make sure that, I think that the biggest elements are the interfaces, to make sure that those interfaces were fully coordinated. So when we did get a stage 3, we paid them for that process. And then we had a choice: do we go out to the market with this information, because we know this is robust information, to get check prices, bearing in mind that the specialists that were engaged had a better understanding and knowledge of the building and the logistics and how the building would work. So we used that to really good effect. And I think we would have reduced, in the region, our overall costs, outturn costs, by about 7.5%, which is a significant amount of money on anything. On development of that size. That was 100 million plus, so it was a really good return.
That's an interesting point. What about the project risk and so on of going through that process? Did that change at all?
It reduced the risk. As you were going through the process, you were minimizing the risk. So that risk, that pot of risk money you had, you were drawing down on that. So you had your coordination, between your envelope and your balcony, between your envelope structure and balcony, and then you had the performance. You knew, at the end of stage 3, before you even go on to the construction details, that you'd met your performance criteria. So you keep on reducing that risk each stage of the design process you're going through. But you're bringing the specialists on the journey with you, and they were helping you de-risk that. And as opposed to, when you issue a stage 3 to a main contractor, he'll include anything between 3 and 5% design development and another 3 to 5% risk money. So you're up to 10% of your construction costs before you even start. So what we were doing was trying to bring the value of that 10% into the stage 3. So when we did send it out, the risk money was reduced.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept, and we see it quite often with people which do it well. Is that they're not only just reducing the risk of actually having potential issues on site and clashes or sequencing challenges or material issues, but also when you're looking at the broader picture as well of the knock-on consequences that has of program and then prelim costs and all the indirect ones. But if this isn't something you're used to, if you're not used as a construction company to actually working collaboratively at an early stage, what would you say for people which are kind of looking and saying, I hear you what you're saying about the benefits, how do I actually know and actually weigh up whether that is the right approach for me on my project. What comments have you got and advice on that, Ken?
I think there has to be a little bit of trust, and it is all, you know, collaboration is about establishing a relationship, and it's explaining to a client, or getting a client to understand that, you know, contractors, supply chain, everybody needs to gain some value out of a project. That's principally the reason in business, is to get value. And client needs to understand, yes, contractors have to make money. You can still make money and bring value. Don't be pushing the contractor down to the lowest common denominator, because then you don't get the value in your asset. You know, if this is an asset that you're going to sell on, if it's residential properties, you don't want to get back into the situation where we have now, even yesterday, find ourselves where there's £5 billion of tax money coming from central government to reclad numerous buildings around the country. So what has happened there? The quality has been impacted. Will the developer of those buildings suffer as a consequence? Yes, because there's going to be a developer's levy imposed now to recoup that £5 billion. So I think it's important that, you know, there is trust between the parties, that collaboration is, you know, it's more than a one-way street. There's a lot of people involved to get a truly collaborative project. And I find that, you know, people are changing with digitalization. People are seeing more of, you know, you can build your building in a 3D, 4D format before you even go to site, so the client can see what you've done, where the interfaces are, where, you know, the value is and cost of that building. And that's where contractors support that, and supply chain support it. So I think, going back to the original question, we just need to trust each other a little bit more, and just build and maintain those relationships. And, you know, if you do that, you know, that's how you'll get repeat business.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess, certainly from our point of view, we're big believers in working collaboratively with our supply chain. And the things you're looking for at that early stage, which shouldn't be any different from any contractor really, is you're looking for what's their track record, what's the values of the company and the culture which actually underpin the whole process. Because if it's right, the culture of the company is right, and the approach is, and the physical evidence of that ultimately is what processes they go in place, what are the people actually like, what are the values of the owners and the people around that, which is actually what builds for a trustworthy partner. It's not just that somebody says, yeah, sure, we can help you save loads of money. It's actually what are the things which will actually work that through. How up to date are they with the latest things, especially with fire regulations and anything related to fire, is quite an important thing. Any comments on that, Ken?
No, I think the word you use, culture, is very important, because with a good business culture, you will get collaboration. It just happens anyway, because people have set the same goals. You can set goals and a mission statement for a project at the outset, and, you know, that can be contained within the design brief. And if you set that out, you would only be wanting to engage people that believe in those goals that you've set for that particular development, and that believe in the mission statement and have the same principles and culture as you have. I think it's really important. And that's, you know, you look at the long term. If you're developing a relationship with a client, it's not one project you want to work on. You want to develop that relation so you get the next projects, and you bring benefits from your first development with them to your second. So you're always looking at continued value that you bring to clients. And I think more often than not, we're seeing that now. I think a lot of clients are looking at self-delivery themselves, where they're not going to traditional main contractors. And that's where the trust builds up with the supply chain and the manufacturers. And that's where they get the most support, if they're looking at a self-delivery model from themselves, and they're leaning more heavily on the supply chain.
Interesting point there. Just, Ken, we noticed on LinkedIn, you gave an interesting talk about off-site management and so on. Have you got a few tips here for the audience as to talk about new technologies and how it can benefit, and how collaboration and the supply chain fits into the whole kind of theme of what you were talking about on LinkedIn?
So I think there's going to be a change in management of how we see things. I think we are going to see a lot more special, with MMC and offsite gaining lots more traction now, and particularly because of Brexit and the labour shortages, because of the Hackett report and the removal of the cladding and the new Part B. It's driving, and the housing shortage that we're in the middle of at the moment. It's driving towards MMC. But MMC will only work if you've got all of the components. So digitalization is really important. We are using the tools that we got, like design it before we build it, and that's how BIM helps us. And then things like augmented reality and virtual reality, so that people can actually see and walk through the finished product, whether it be a residential building or a commercial building or a leisure building. But where I see the things changing is, I think your specialists will be asked to get more involved in the construction process. Whereas before, you may have had, in a typical residential building, you might have had 20 to 30 packages and 20 to 30 suppliers engaged in that project. You will see that reduced down to 4 or 5 main components. So your groundwork and structure, your envelope, and then either your pods, or whether it be bathroom pods or whole room pods or play. So you'll see a reduction in number of people on site, and where they will then look at, do we engage a main contractor? Do we not just self-deliver this, or do we engage the specialist contractor to deliver their large component of that? So I think that's where the change is going to come. And there is, new management techniques that we need to understand. It's not just on site. We need to understand the factory environment and how that process works. And whilst we're building in a factory, it's the whole of the supply chain. Logistics becomes much more important now.
Yeah.
Because the logistics outside of the factory, and bringing your safety on site, bringing that to the factory, so that when you do get the product on site, that it's packaged correctly, that you can offload it correctly, and you can install it as it should. So you're reducing that impact on safety all of the time, reducing the hazards. So I think it's interesting, and I think a lot of colleges, a lot of the vocational qualifications, I would hope are going to start going in that direction, where we're looking more off-site, what we can do, and site managers and project management off-site, and how you can manage quality from taking it from site-based to off-site. So it's interesting, and I think a lot more companies like yourselves are getting engaged in that process, and their apprenticeships are moving towards that process.
Yeah, and as you say, it's the hand in glove approach, isn't it, of the early stage coordination to getting those details right. The digitalisation is a kind of second vein of that, and the quality process and so on. It's made easier by those factory controls, that collaboration, and that digital processing, isn't it?
That is pure collaboration, and that's what gives us, an outturn product of very high quality. And as going back to the original question, on the design brief, very early on, we should be suggesting to the client or informing the client, what is, once you've got a procurement route, is MMC the route to go down, so that you have it, you're not back engineering at a later date just to fit in an MMC product. I think it's important that that's included in the design brief from the onset. And so it's and this is where the supply chain really do come in, and the manufacturers come in, because they have that knowledge.
Yeah. So it's fortunate with things like balconies as an attachment they are an MMC item you can add at a later date. I say that with caution because you've still got the whole coordination of what you're fixing to. Is it panelised concrete system? Is it back to an RC frame and so on? However, to maximise all the benefits of MMC, the earlier you are in there, the more difference you can impact on that through the sequencing or through creating details between two MMC systems, for instance, that panelised system and a balcony.
It's exactly that, because what you're doing then is, previously I said we were designing in zones, so we're more than likely leaving a bigger zone which is net saleable area. So the architect is designing so that any product can fit within that zone. But if you get the specialist involved early on and you set those parameters, you're getting benefits not just in value, but in potentially in net saleable area on your building. Similarly with lift shafts, we tend to design the biggest lift shaft we can so we can fit any manufacturer's lift in it. But when you do a study on that, you find that you may be losing for each lift shaft, you could be losing anything up to 7 or 8 square foot per floor. And if you're selling saleable area at 1,500 quid a square foot, then you times that by the floor, and it outweighs. So bring those lift manufacturers in earlier on. Decide on what lift you're going to use. Is it a 13 person? Is it an 8 person? Design the shaft around that rather than just in case or maybe scenarios. Similarly with balconies, your cladding zones and your bracketry zone. Get the specialist in early so you can reduce that zone to a maximum parameter.
Yeah, and as you say, it is about then taking you back to what you were saying right at the beginning, really, of actually setting those objectives. Is that if you are maintaining the building as well afterwards, the thermal heat loss for a building and designing out anchors might be a key driver as to why you might use perhaps a panelised system where you can get a real low carbon balcony, low or high thermal performance. So you're not losing money during the duration of that lifespan. However, if you're going down the route of actually selling it, it might be a completely different approach you're taking in that early stage, isn't it?
Yes, and they're changing at the moment. It's going through the planning process at the moment, but it's in particularly in London about embodied carbon.
Yeah.
And the impact carbon has on the environment. So if we're in there, and there is going to be a levy attached. We're going to have you're going to see in the next 6 months to a year, targets that have got to be met and maintained, because by 2050 we're supposed to be carbon neutral as a country. So we're going to see more and more where the thermal performance is critical to the functionality of a building, and the products that we use within that building and the selection of those products is going to be critical. And you can only do that very early on. And again, I go back to the specialist knowledge and experience that the supply chain like yourselves can bring to that table, because you fully understand the process.
Yeah, and let's not forget as well, if you've got carbon coming from lost energy is also money.
Yeah, and somebody's paying for that. And if you're maintaining that building or operating that building, be it a hotel, they are the ongoing costs that are critical. So look at your capital costs. You may spend a little bit more up front, but then your whole life cycle and your operating costs, or you reap the benefits, because you're not changing a plant every 10 years. It might be on a 20-year cycle. And then your actual maintenance and your planned and reactive maintenance costs are reduced. And then just your general operation costs for the building itself. And these are the things that if as a client we're selling those assets to a pension fund or to another party, these are the critical elements that they'll do their due diligence on. How much does it cost me as a potential purchaser of a building to actually run the building, not just the capital cost. And again, I think that's becoming more and more prevalent. People are really focusing on that, because we're now seeing buildings much more as assets.
You made some really interesting points. We're looking forward also to having you on the panel discussion as well. Thank you very much for your time. Very much appreciate talking with you, Ken.
Thanks very much, Nick, and I will see you soon.
Thank you, Ken. It's great to have you joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you later on the panel. Please do remember, if you do have any questions for Ken, use the Slido link below. I'd now like to introduce Katie Collins, the Senior Account Executive from 3Kit.
So I'm Matt Seeger. I'm our Vice President of Solution Engineering here at 3Kit. I've spent my entire career in pretty much the world of configuration in one way or another. I began at a company called Big Machines, which handled complex omni-channel configuration, pricing, quoting use cases. It's an Oracle company now. Spent some time at SpringCM, which configured contracts for complex agreements. It's a DocuSign customer. And then also at SteelBrick, which is another configuration price quote software company that focused more on the configuration of software sales. So what types of user agreements and subscriptions would be compatible with others. That's now a Salesforce company. And now I find myself here at 3Kit. I would say this current endeavor of mine is really the culmination of things we've seen over the past decade in configuration, where configuration has really been focused around rules and defining rules, making sure they're consumable from your direct sales teams to the channel to e-commerce for self-service. But it's always been kind of a text-based rule. You could always make sure your things are right, but there's always been this need and ask that we've seen from our customers to visualize products that we've been selling. And 3Kit is really on the forefront of making that next step in configuration possible by incorporating not only the rules to make sure whatever it is you're building is going to be technically valid. It's going to allow you to be creative, but also balance the rules of what is possible and unlock this new thing of show me what it is that I'm building. So that's what that brings me here to 3Kit. My role at 3Kit, like I said, is the Vice President of Solution Engineering, is to work with our customers and prospects to understand what problems they're facing with their configurators today, what their visualization needs are, and basically prescribe solutions using the 3Kit platform to help them unlock value with the tools that we offer. I also support our connectors for other types of technologies to make sure 3Kit's visual configurator can be used alongside all the technology that also exists at businesses, so supporting our technology partners as well. And I'll turn it over to you, Katie.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So Katie Collins, I have the pleasure of looking after Northern Europe here at 3Kit. I have a very similar background to Matt, actually, although obviously not quite as technical as Matt. But I also previously worked at Big Machines, obviously going into Oracle, and also worked at SteelBrick going into Salesforce. So I think the beauty of this is that Matt and I have backgrounds in the world of configuration, and the beauty of what we're doing now is trying to demonstrate how visual configuration becomes powerful from not only a B2B perspective but also B2C perspectives, and how that can support increasing traffic, increasing conversions, increasing customer experience and digital presence, and that is what we're looking to support our customers with. At a very high level, for anyone that may not be quite as familiar with 3Kit, we basically provide visual configuration. And the beauty of that is that there are 3 key areas where we look to provide that visual experience to our customers. The first one, if we focus here on the right-hand side, is all around, and I do apologize, might be a bit of banging going on in the background. The first one there is visual 3D configuration. So the ability to be able to rotate your particular product around in a 360, being able to zoom in, zoom out, focus in on particular aspects of that product, and obviously change various different parts that are available for that product and available to sell or inquire about. The second one there is augmented reality, and this is becoming more and more popular within the marketplace, and certainly within certain industries. Personally, I would say from my experience so far, augmented reality is becoming very popular in the world of furniture, in the world of manufacturing, in construction, and also in the world of retail. So obviously different use cases for each one of those industries, but we're seeing some really, really exciting stuff. So the beauty of augmented reality is that once someone has gone ahead and configured their particular product, changing colors, changing shapes, changing sizing, adding in different accessories or different parts, they can then use their mobile phone device to place that particular item in their own location. So whether that is in an office, whether that is in a garden, whether that is in a particular building site, whatever it might be. So you can get a true sense of what that particular item looks like. You can get a sense of the real scale of what that particular product is going to entail as well. And last but not least, we do also support what we call our virtual photography. So taking that same 3D model asset, we can go through a process of what we call rendering down into static imagery. So you can produce basically millions or even billions of imagery at scale. So being able to see all of those different permutations in very, very high quality rendering images. The beauty of this one in particular is that it often is used for campaign work. It's often used for marketing, high-level brochures, or high-level outputs that you would want to send or display to customers. So a little bit about 3Kit as a whole is, I'm sure you probably gathered already, but a lot of our leadership team has backgrounds in the world of CPQ. So the majority of the folks there that you see on screen have backgrounds in big machines and or steel brick or both. The one exception there is our founder, which is a guy called Ben Houston, the second there on the list down. And Ben actually has a background creating software that was used in some of the big Hollywood movies. Ben decided to take a little bit of a sidestep and obviously then focus on the world of digital, focus on the world of commerce and how he can actually improve businesses with their product visuals. And the two worlds, I should say, collided with experts in the world of CPQ and Ben's expertise in the world of 3D. Over the course of the last roughly 18 months or so, we've had $30 million of investment behind us, which was a private investor by the name of Goddard Abel, which you can see there at the bottom, and also a combination from Salesforce Ventures and Shasta Ventures. So really, really exciting times for us here at 3Kit. We're seeing lots of growth and lots of different opportunities. So just a couple of interesting aspects that are a little bit more general, and then of course we can focus in more to your questions, Nick, that you may have. So what we're seeing personally in the market today, and I think that the current climate has highlighted it even more so, is that the importance of digital it is incredibly relevant. The more that you're able to provide your customers, whether that is an end customer or whether that is via an indirect channel. So, architects, designers, dealers, resellers, any kind of customer that you work with, the more information that you can provide around that particular product, the higher the outcome of success is more likely to be. So we're seeing a trend that, people don't really want to have to talk to salespeople unless they are genuinely interested to find out more. So again, the more that you're able to supply in terms of information on products, information on pricing, information on all of those different product variants, the more likely you're going to then have qualified leads coming from the website to your sales team. With that being said, we've also seen some interesting perspectives around the importance of visuals generally, and the importance of how that is when it comes to decision making. So we're seeing that there are trends around up to 83% of buyers point to imagery as being an influential factor. Now, of course, it's not the only factor. There are many, many things, as you know, Nick, that would go into making purchasing decisions. And, marketing is obviously a huge influencer in that field as well. But what this is truly highlighting is that the more you're able to share around those different combinations and basically provide an immersive experience for your customers, the more that they feel as though they have connected with that product and that they do want to invest time further or do want to actually make a purchase. So I've put this, this is the last slide that I had, because I thought that the rest of the conversation here could be a little bit more informal and we can take it in different directions. But overall, 3Kit can directly benefit both internal teams and internal stakeholders as well as external stakeholders. And we see that there is a really lovely synergy around the overall customer journey. So obviously different customers, different industries will obviously approach this slightly differently, of course. But typically you can have both brand new leads that want to come to your website, want to inquire about particular products, and having that ability to be able to go ahead and experiment with different configurations, going ahead and playing with different colors, different finishes, different sizes, and then obviously either make a purchase or make an inquiry. Now, the beauty of that is that there is no loss of any data. So by having that inquiry submitted, you are able to obviously have that as what we call a safe configuration. So there can be a really nice communication between the salesperson, the sales representative, and the customer or the dealer, architect, designer, whoever is making that inquiry. So that, in theory, should speed up any kind of sales cycle that you may have. It should improve communication because you're visually able to see and demonstrate which products the end customer is looking for. But as a knock-on effect, it can also help to support with marketing. It can also help to support with the product design because you may get feedback around various different parts, components, etc., that could end up influencing the actual end design of the product. And so there is a really nice kind of full circle of how the visuals and how the different combinations come together to improve not only the customer experience, but also the internal sales experience and ongoing innovation.
One of the things we're realizing just generally across all parts of the world probably is that the digital embracing of digital technologies and so on has been accelerated by COVID.
Yeah.
Unsurprisingly, yes, it is probably happening anyway, but it's certainly been accelerated. And I guess probably one of the key questions I'd like your contribution for the book is why would somebody in construction, an architect or something like that, how would they actually benefit from using product configuration and so on? Because there are more and more companies in construction doing it. I know you work with a company which manufacture oak beams, for instance, and they're using it for a reason. At Sapphire, we've obviously chosen one for a reason as well. What are the key things which people are benefiting from, do you think?
I guess I can give my perspective on it, but I'm sure Matt has other ideas as well. So for me, I think it goes back to that ability to be self-sufficient, to get everything started. So oftentimes with organizations within the world of construction, you may already have pre-existing relationships with some architects, some designers, etc. But a whole bunch of them might be new to your organization. And the ability to have a very flexible configurator allows someone to have the freedom to experiment early on with the different designs that they want to go ahead with. So being able to, so one of the things that I particularly like for both Sapphire and our other customer Oak Beams that you mentioned earlier is the ability around what we call parametric sizing. And that is where you can have completely bespoke sizing to accommodate different scaling. So allowing that kind of visual experience, and not only the visual experience on sizing, but understanding the knock-on ramifications of rules around other product associations. So knowing that it's going to be safe, knowing that it's going to fit within certain standards, knowing that you may have to have other accessories or parts to complement those changes. For example, in Sapphire, one of the things that I love is when you're changing the sizing of the balcony, it not only changes maybe the size of the doors or the number of doors required, but it also adjusts the number of anchors that would need to go into the building to ensure its safety. So having that flexibility up front, I think provides that freedom for someone to get creative early on. And then it makes it very easy to have that seamless communication between an architect or designer and a salesperson, because you are relating to the same products. There is no kind of miscommunication on what the actual requirements or specification are. But Matt, would you like to add anything onto that?
Katie, you said kind of what my thoughts were in maybe a different way, and I'll just maybe say it from my point of view, but I think a lot of it's rooted in the reasons we look at technology for anything. It's usually to solve a problem, make something easier, or make something faster. And we've done this for a long time in any type of product configuration, but also in the building of construction goods and in the manufacture of them, all the way back to things like CAD. And where I think the configurators, especially ones with visuals, play a really strong role is it expedites the ability to be creative. It allows anybody who's looking to bolt these things onto the exterior of a building immediately get their own feedback in their brain, which is infinitely faster than any computer, and say, I don't like the way this looks. I'd like it to be a different color, be of a different angle. That's too high, this is too low. And it allows us to expedite that creativity, but also do it in a way that's balanced within the confines of kind of reality still, by applying the rules. So there's these very innate primal feelings you get when you see something, and that's our creativity, and it allows you to make the adjustments within those things, all within a kind of a world that's going to ensure things like safety. There's a lot of real world ramifications about putting a balcony on a building, whether it's 6 floors up or 40 floors up, right? There's the safety of the person who's going to be on there, the weight of all these things. And it's really striking a great balance between expediting creativity, but also ensuring the things that the world and society need to function well, which are like the safety and the applicability of these things and how can we manufacture them. So that's where I've seen, the importance of this. And Katie brought up a really good point, which I think is something that we'll see as a trend for many years to come, which is self-service. This is something that I'd say we've always heard of awesome tools that people in professional fields have used, whether they're architects, engineers using CAD software, drafting tools, and it's always been something reserved for people who are professionals in those fields. But more and more as technology becomes, I guess, easier to use and the devices that we all have are more and more powerful, we can actually start putting these things in the hands of who would be the end users, such as designing my own balcony or designing my own shed or my own garage, like the Oak Beams configurator you might have seen, taking the creativity tools and putting those in the hands of the purchasers.
Yeah, it's making something that I guess could be very complex, making it very easy for a lay person or someone that does have some level of experience, but it's making it less complicated through the use of visuals.
There's a couple of really interesting points here. I'm just going to take one of those and then come back to the other bit later there. Matthew, you mentioned about the whole rule-based side of things, and is this, in your mind, what makes it different and a better approach to actually try things faster and, as you say, within the bounds of reality, than using, because no doubt you could create a nice looking balcony in Revit or something like that. But in fact, you're still exploring all the different parameters, you're exploring them fast, and it is all that rule-based stuff, which is so much a key part of all this software building and so on, as you create a configurator like the Coach platform.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you were thinking?
I think that's definitely one angle of it. I think the other angle is just the speed at which you can go through all of the valid permutations. A great kind of mental exercise I always like to do is take it away and think about how you would have to do it if you didn't have some type of tool out there like a visual configurator. So let's just say we're designing a balcony and you've gone to an architectural drafting tool or even some kind of like conceptual artist, and they've drawn something and put it together for you, and you've reviewed it internally and you've agreed, yes, this is an acceptable balcony. It's going to hold the weight. It's going to meet all the standards of kind of building code and the like. And you present the draft to the client and they say, that's great, but I don't like it. Now you have to repeat that whole process of going back to the drafters and trying to interpret what that person didn't like about it, and then exploring what options might exist to alleviate the constraint that they had of like, I don't like this thing. Where now we're like, I use the word expediting creativity. Maybe I made that term up, but really what that says is like, that thing I don't like, I can make the change to it in real time to see if it makes me feel better about the way it looks, while also ensuring that all the work that has happened in kind of the heads of the smart people, the engineers, is being put in front of me, but I don't even know it. I can't build a balcony with like a cantilever that's so far off that the balcony will collapse. That's just not going to be something that can happen. And those rules are put in front of me, and I may not even know that I'm working within the constraints of a rule system, but I am, and I'm able to rapidly move through the visual problems I might have seen with a balcony without having to do it in the old way of incorporating all these expensive resources and time-consuming tasks that might exist if you didn't have such a tool.
That's a really bad point, and Katie touched on this only with the anchor view on the balcony one. That you may not realise that adding an extra 10 millimeters to your balcony design, or 30 millimeters or 1 inch, whatever you want to call it, by adding a small amount extra onto your balcony, that could actually mean that you need another anchor.
Yeah.
And it's suddenly that kind of mental note that, oh, hang on, I probably don't want to do that. Maybe I'll go 10 mil out on the projection instead, or the other way around. It's that kind of immediate kind of feedback as well.
Yeah.
What about the pricing feedback? I know that's certainly something which has been incorporated by OBEAMS as well.
Yeah, and pricing is something that we find across lots and lots of different industries, and I find different companies have different approaches to whether they want to portray pricing digitally, or if they want to have it as a follow-up inquiry. But customers that do want to showcase pricing in a digital way, I personally find it to be a very useful exercise, because as you're changing various different parameters, you can see what the pricing association for doing so would be. So if, for example, you're changing from wooden to aluminium, or different finishes, you're going from a nice red paint to a blue paint, or something simple like that, there might be different kind of connotations to what that pricing impact could look like. And certainly, like OBEAMS, as we keep referring to, they have pricing displayed on their website. And as you're going through parametric sizing, where you're stretching out what that roof truss or that garage is going to look like, the pricing adjusts accordingly. So we can actually understand the amount of materials that are required in order to stretch that particular product out. So a customer knows, well, if I want to have this, this particular size, that's the impact on that particular product. And of course, in a world of more B2B, which they primarily work in, it's not obviously one roof truss. They're probably, a customer is going to order 100 or 1,000 of them at one time. So having the difference, just of a couple of pounds here or there could actually have quite a significant overall end cost to them if they were to get that slightly wrong. So we want to make sure that is as accurate as possible. And we have that integration. We can set up that integration, I could say. So visually, pricing can be displayed as those components being adjusted.
I was talking of product configurators being using them to identify potential problem areas or design flaws which you might not have realised by building it in, say, Revit or something like that. That's something which you find as a benefit to clients, and particularly construction clients, in actually identifying some of the kind of problematic areas, or actually being able to stop those being designed and start off with.
Yep. Again, I go back to thinking about how these things get done without the tools being in place. And we've sold configurators to clients across all of these different areas. And one of the exercises we used to go through to identify these problems and see if we even have a solution to them is to run almost a consulting style engagement where we would talk about the world as it exists today when the tool's not there. And throughout this exercise, like if Katie and I were running it, Katie would be mapping the physical things that are happening, like, you know, Bob runs the paper to Jim. Jim confirms that it has the right number of anchors. Now he can take this to whoever. And myself in the room would be just cataloging all of the things that are problematic in that process. We call them disturbances. And so we would leave with this whole catalog of disturbances. And what's always interesting, kind of again, another mental thought experiment would be, it does get done today, right? The problem is being solved today. It's just highly inefficient. It usually involves way too many systems, way too many people, and way too many manual processes that are prone to error. So what we look to do is actually take those things and put them into a system where if Jim left the company in a week, you would still be able to test that there's the proper number of anchors in there, because we've now put them in a system that validates the rules and enforces them across that process. So I think even in industries where there's a lot of bespoke products and bespoke solutions that can be brought out there, you know, there's a lot of architectural changes and probably a lot of unique challenges you face. The generalized rule set, once put into a tool, can be used across a lot of different applications to alleviate a lot of those manual or siloed processes that are prone to error today.
The other thing that maybe I can tag on to Matt's comments there is a lot of conversations that I have with organizations, particularly in the world of manufacturing and construction, are that it takes them a lot of time, effort, cost, and logistics to actually manufacture some of those combinations in order to portray some of their catalog in one way or another, whether that is, you know, using traditional photography, whether that's having it at some kind of an event show. And obviously just having a small handful of those permutations in a physical format is, one, very costly, two, can take a huge amount of time and is very, very difficult, especially in large manufacturing or large construction, very difficult, challenging. So I can't speak there. With that being said, the power of the configurator can showcase all of those different combinations much, much easier and in real time, so that you don't have to worry about shipping, you don't have to worry about logistics. You can create all of these different combinations without having the customer to actually say, can I see that before I decide? So it saves a huge amount of cost and time from that regard as well.
So it's kind of avoiding that prototyping methodology and so on.
Exactly. That's exactly the correct word. Thank you. That's what I was looking for.
One of the other things I know which you offer as part of the tools you build is that exploded view, and actually giving people a bit of an understanding of it. And we obviously use a translucent view, if you like, of through the concrete, so you can see what's going on.
Yep.
There are things which potentially you can't really get that from a physical sample either, are they?
No. Absolutely, and there's different ways or different use cases that we see that exploded view taking shape. So, you know, one of the ways is just from a pure, you know, seeing all the different parts for a customer to understand. You know, there are maybe 100 components that might go into this balcony. The other side of it is for education and training. So someone actually could click on a particular part and know how that might fit into, you know, the other components, and it comes together nicely. What we're actually seeing is another really fundamental use case, and it's becoming more popular in discussions that we're having now, is the opportunity for parts upselling. So if, for example, on a balcony, I don't know, maybe if this is coming further down the line, but let's say one of the rails was maybe needing replacement. So rather than the entire balcony needing replacement, perhaps one of the railings or a pane of glass is something that a customer may want to just replace. So being able just to select that unique part, add it to a shopping cart or make an inquiry on that particular part component is something that we're seeing is very, very popular now. It's almost a parts, once they're live, a happy customer, it's that maintenance through that journey, and knowing that particular visual pane of glass or that particular rail that was unique to them in the past can actually be replaced as well.
So it's almost coming back to the kind of the whole golden thread as we talk about in the construction industry of having that information there for the life cycle. So
yes,
it makes that maintenance process easier. It's the kind of asset management and so on for those who are managing the actual premises once they've been built. So just touching on that, and obviously one of the reasons why people might need to do that might be that they're upgrading because of mandatory or some form of compliance issue. For instance, fire is quite topical in the UK
yes,
at the moment and across many areas of the world. But one of the things we're obviously seeing is decking, for instance, is a lot of older buildings being replaced or other areas being upgraded. Do you think configurators can generally help with compliance both before the build's happened and at a stage where, after the build has happened, we've got a live building? What's your thought on that, Katie?
Yeah. So personally, I think that if they are an existing customer and you've sold a balcony to them, and you've got all of that asset, all of their data assets and what have you, and say something within the compliance changes in 2 years' time, you would be able to then have recommendations to provide and say, we recommend, or maybe it's mandatory, that you upgrade your decking or you upgrade, your fire safety or whatever it might be. And you would be able to have those assets available to recommend the appropriate selections for that particular customer or particular architect to provide that to the end customer. So I see it as being a full circle. You've got your new customers that you can obviously service today, and you can also manage existing customers and making sure that they're getting the best and the latest and greatest in your technology.
That's helpful. And just lastly, one of the points you mentioned earlier, you're presenting, was about the AR, VR side of things.
Yeah.
We've all seen kind of people walking around, whether it's been a video of somebody sort of crashing into something wearing goggles and so on. But where do you think that actually fits in the world of construction, and how might the construction industry actually benefit from the use of VR and AR and what have you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess first of all, I'll try and easily outline the differences between AR and VR. So VR is what we call virtual reality, which is where people have the goggles and you're going into the world through the goggles. AR is augmented reality, which is where someone can experience that augmented reality experience just using your mobile phone device. You don't need, a special app, or you don't need special goggles. So first and foremost, we like to focus in on the world of AR. Because it means that it's more readily available to the majority of people, whether that's an end consumer, whether that's your partners, your architects, etc. Now, we are, we're web-based AR, so anyone that has a mobile phone would be able to leverage that AR experience. Now, if we focus in specifically on the world of construction, there are two key areas where I think we can look to help. So first of all, when you're looking at AR, you can either choose to place the item on a flat surface, which would be a flaw in most cases. But we're also able to place it onto the actual onto an actual wall. So, for the use of something like Sapphire balconies, if someone has gone ahead and created their particular design, their particular configuration of the balcony that they want to go ahead with, they can then use augmented reality on a flat wall surface to see, is it the right design? Is it the right size? Is it the right scale? Is that going to look good, 40 times up or sideways across the building? So they can get a true immersive experience and know what that particular product is really going to look like in reality. But Matt, do you want to add anything to that? You're probably more of an expert here than I am.
I think going back to what you said about just managing the way that something was built and servicing it in the future, I think when we think about where AR and VR have already seen a lot of traction and will continue to grow, are going to be in training, in both training and services, I should say. So if you think about how you're going to train a technician on how to repair something, which is, there's only kind of two ways to do it right now. One is to find that exact configured balcony out in the wild, which it may not be installed yet, right? Like you may have a project where you're going to do it, so that option isn't even available. Or take that digital representation of it and produce training material on how are we going to clean it? How are we going to do a replacement in a way that doesn't compromise safety? How do we do a full kind of removal and replacement in the case of these things? AR and VR have proven to be very, very useful in those regards. It's the same reason you think about training in other industries, like a service industry. They train for events that you never want to experience, like an armed robbery. You train for that in a virtual environment where it's actually safe, the same way that you can actually train for servicing a really large piece of capital equipment, which may not exist out in the wild yet. The other is around service, which is kind of backing up to the last conversation we had, but it's really extending the configurator's capabilities beyond just the design of the item for the purpose of getting it sold and installed. But then furthermore is that thing has a life expectancy of decades. You're going to have a long time of servicing this asset out in the wild, where you don't want to continue to live in the world of a serialized number on a balcony with a bill of materials, which are text and SKUs, which not a lot of humans could interpret without having been in the industry for a long time, but rather the digital twin, which is taking that exact balcony as configured and keeping a digital representation of it moving through the entire process. So you talked about things like translucent or exploded views. Well, you now have the ability to look inside of any installed balcony digitally without having to go on site and do those likes. So I see, back to your question about AR and VR, it's already had great kind of value proven out in the purposes of training, and we see more and more of that value getting unlocked in the service of these assets. So being able to overlay the balcony as it should be installed while it is in place is a great application of augmented reality to easily identify discrepancies, but say, well, I can clearly see this rail is not installed anymore. Maybe it's been removed, vandalized, I'm not sure, whatever the use case may be. But being able to then incorporate that into an experience where you can just tap the item and say, this is what's missing. It identifies the missing part of the bill of materials without ever having to traverse through a huge catalog of data, but rather matching that up with the digital twin. I think that's a great use case of what we see happening right now. I think if we think about how it's going to continue to impact the world in the future, augmented reality and virtual reality, I think the place that it's just slowly entering into today, which is going to be accelerated much more in the future, is before that thing's even installed and sold, allowing people to experience the balcony, the buyer, before a single piece of material leaves the factory floor.
Yeah, so in taking some things you've just talked about there, if we're looking at the construction phase, then, or perhaps if we take the phase before that, when you're looking at creating the vision to start off with, and we could use it as Katie said for sort of visualizing that through AR and stuff. And we could look at choosing the colors of like decking, for instance. But then as we go through the cycle, it may be in the construction phase that we want to actually say, well, okay, how many anchors and whereabouts should these anchors actually be in this position in the building, relative to a certain other parameter, for instance, a door position or something like that. And you can visualize as to where to set out some of these components and so on. Going through to the point of replacing it, again, if you're about to replace a load of decking, well, if you know that that's the situation, then you know that there's going to be 3 arms connecting back into the building, and this is the approximate locations. It can help you make informed decisions about that replacement strategy and the maintenance of that in future. One other thing I know some people in the UK have been using AR for was identifying missing items on a construction site location, where you can apply the model to a virtual scene and you can see, oh, that's missing something on this and it's missing a piece. I appreciate we talked about a bit about that in terms of balconies, but that could be quite key for the quality process, couldn't it, during that phase of the construction?
The digital twin isn't always limited to a product that was sold, but it could be the construction site as you're going through different phases, being able to catalog these different states of the project as it goes through preparation, installation, etc., using augmented reality and virtual reality. And probably it's not a far stretch to think that that'll be aided by computer vision to not only, like right now, a human can identify that something might be missing from a construction site, but taking these digital replications of things and applying artificial intelligence and computer vision to them to ensure it's almost like the smartest configurator ever, which is the computer ensuring quality of a construction site.
Sure, and I think one of the last items we haven't really touched on is during that whole manufacturing process, tying together the information which is done at an early stage through to what is actually delivered. How do your clients find that benefits that manufacturing process, which ultimately improves the end quality and pricing and so on to the actual people buying and paying for these buildings?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I would say is that, once there is an agreed specification, there is a communication of data that can go through into your wider architecture. So your CRM, your ERP, any other systems that you might have that are supporting your booking, manufacturing processes. So there should be a seamless communication of what someone is looking to order or what they have ordered. So you'll have like accurate accurate SKU numbers, and to understand how that particular product should be manufactured, because you will have accurate visuals of different angles of that particular product to be able to allow the actual end manufacturers, the end designers, to ensure that they have the correct visual representation to make it unique for that particular customer.
Sure, and also compressing that whole period and taking out a lot of the labour elements of that, which ultimately slow things down and increase the likelihood of an error, yes, and ultimately cost money.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Absolutely.
As well.
Absolutely. 100%.
There's kind of this relationship between the more time or cost it takes to manufacture a good, the more costly an error actually is. So the further up the process that you can capture those errors and make sure they're eliminated, the better off you're going to be, right? Manufacturing 100 balconies and bringing them to the job site to find out that they can't be hung because either the building or the balcony will need to be modified, that doesn't seem like a very cheap or maybe even possible problem to solve for me. So by putting these processes in place to ensure valid kind of fit and finish up front, eliminate all the kind of downstream processes up front. The better the data that goes in earlier in the process, the more streamlined and efficient and basically profitable your processes are going to be further downstream.
Yeah, that's a helpful point, and it's probably a good point to bring it to a close on, really. We're going right back to the start of what you were talking about, of if the manufacturers and people creating these product configurators, for instance, Coach, are getting all these parameters right for a start, it's saving so much time and energy and effort down the line. It's improving the quality, it's shortening the lead time, and ultimately it's making that a better experience overall for the construction industry. Thank you very much for your time, Katie and Matthew.
Absolutely, you're more than welcome.
Thank you, Katie. Great interview there. Some really interesting stuff covered. If you do have any questions for Katie, then please do use the Slido link below. I'd now like to introduce Tony Ball. Tony is the Managing Director at C3 Alliance.
Welcome, Tony. I'm glad to have you on board. Do you mind starting off just introducing who you are?
Yeah, Tony Ball. I'm Managing Director of C3 Alliance. We're a development management consultancy.
Thanks very much. And we're looking to discuss a bit around the gap between design and construction. Starting off with, Tony, what do you think this gap actually is? What is it?
From my experiences, I think that it starts back with the initial design phases in a scheme, and certainly with the design from early design that's maybe sort of pre-planning, and certainly into the design development stages through your typical reader stages from sort of two to 4 to 5, and in the development of that design, what I'm seeing is that the design consultants, we're talking like the architect and the structural engineer and the mechanical and electrical engineer, quite often go out, and as they're developing their design, to me, there is more and more gaps that are appearing in that design where there is real requirement for specialist contractor and manufacturer input to complete that design. And we're seeing more and more elements where some difficult details and junctions and interfaces are not designed out accordingly and left with a contractor design or element that's in them, which doesn't resolve the issues until, unfortunately, too late in the whole procurement and chain of the project. So to my mind, that's where that gap of information lies. And it's how you start to work, maybe collaboratively to start to fill that gap.
And what do you think with that kind of supply chain engagement? What do you think, firstly, is a stage and the benefits of getting involved at that stage for the contractor and for the developer or whatever stage of that build it's at?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's to my mind, what everybody wants is a complete and considered design. That's in everyone's benefit. Whether you're the architect, certainly if you're the client, if you're the contractor, it's the holes and the uncertainties and the unknowns that creates risk in the scheme. So I think there's huge benefits to everybody. I think where there's been a historic reluctance to bring in or engage in some of those specialist areas that we'll probably talk about in a minute. But I think the benefit is investing in the project early. Certainly from an architect and a designer's perspective, you can't be an expert in everything. You cannot be expected to know everything, every product, every innovation, every development. So by bringing in the correct people and the correct elements of the supply chain, you can learn, evolve, develop as processes work through and incorporate that early in your design and design around those solutions rather than find out about these things too late, which is classic, Nick. How often do you hear the word, oh, if only we'd have known about that, we could have brought that in, or if only we'd known about that solution. So quite often these solutions are brought in by the supply chain at the back end of the process and are often too late to incorporate. So it's bringing in that expertise and knowledge from the back end earlier in the flow, so you gain the benefit from it.
An interesting point. Just picking on the word you use then, Tony, you use the word risk and look at the risk side of things. Obviously, we've got what has been identified in the whole Hackett findings of risk and the lack of traceability and passing on the baton, if you like, or that golden thread from one person to another throughout. However, one of the common barriers seems to be the fact that people feel that it's a commercial risk to involve people at an early stage. What's your take on that? Is it actually a risk, or is that a perception thing which, as an industry, we've been very good at just carrying forward continually.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big topic. I mean, I think it's a cultural, behaviour-driven element that we have, that is ingrained in us not to nominate or name companies and engage them early within a specification. There's concern of the restrictions that provides. There's concern in the contractual world that creates too much liability for the client, and or the architect. I think we've got to shake off some of those issues and start to be grown up about it. I think the investment of that culture has got to start from the client on the working way down of bringing that approach into the scheme. I mean, certainly when it comes to design and specifying around the solution, my simple logic sometimes, Nick, is that an architect or a designer or a structural engineer has to design around a product. Yeah. So when they're developing a specification, they have to design around something to create the performance and the criteria. So if you're a contractor, main contractor, or if you're a client, or if you're a developer, why not influence and want to manage what products and what supply chain element that architect is designing around? I mean, there's lots of different things you can get in place. I mean, there's a number of people that we work for, and you're starting to see it, where they're building up their supply chain portfolio. They've got specific service level agreements in place with key manufacturers and supply chain, which brings in an element of market competitiveness. So they know that they're competitively priced. They know they're driven in a wider solution. So actually coming up with some maybe pre-agreements and then plugging those people in gets you maximum benefit.
You mentioned benefit there. The overall benefit of collaboration in your eyes is what, Tony?
I think there's two elements. I think there's an element of de-risking of a project through design. So the more complete detail you've got, the more completed solution you've got, you're taking risk out of the outturn and the delivery of that scheme. And then when it comes to the delivery of the project, the strength of relationships that you've had with manufacturers and your supply chain gives you a resilience around your delivery and your ability to deliver that scheme. I think you're taking out, again, at two elements of risk. So to my mind, the benefits come twofold. It's a more efficient design that you're taking risk out of at the upfront. And then when it comes to delivery, again, you're taking out of the risk and you're putting a resilience in your supply chain of your ability to deliver that scheme.
Yeah, absolutely. And in doing so, you're probably actually making it a much more straightforward thing, and cutting down the complexities, and in essence, avoiding a lot of the costs, which may have otherwise be too late to avoid at a later stage.
Trying to take out some of the unknowns and that come up, I think, later on. Look, you're not going to eliminate everything. Don't get me wrong, but there's a good way. It's a large proportion. We're talking 7, 8 out of 10 items where I think that through that processes that we could either eliminate or certainly identify very early. Like I say, I think we have to also realise these are complex buildings and structures that we put together, and that we're not going to have all the answers, but you're going to have a collective of people together to come up with the solutions. Or if nothing else, you've identified some real key areas that you need to focus on through the build. And I think that's fundamental, that stays with us. I say too often you see that the problems or the issues aren't identified until far too late in the process. That gives a real difficulty and an inability to be able to deal with them.
Yeah. Do you mean through planning restrictions and that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, I mean through planning restrictions, I mean through buildability, I mean through sort of, product availability, through not having an efficient design on site, which drives sort of, inefficient working and stopping and starting. I mean, you can go on, but I think that quite often, say, a problem isn't often realised until far too late, either when you're just about to construct or normally when you've actually looking to procure and place subcontract orders or purchase orders, do you actually realise you've got a problem?
Interesting thoughts there, Danny. Look forward to having you on the panel and discussing a bit further. So if anyone's got any questions for Tony, please do put them forward and we'll ask them to Tony and others at the panel discussion. Tony, thank you very much for your time.
Okay, cheers, Nick. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. It's great to have you join us again today. And if you do have any questions for Tony, please use the Slido link below. I'd now like to introduce Ryan Milliken. Ryan is Estimating Manager at FP McCann.
Welcome, Ryan. I'm glad to have you on board. Looking forward to welcoming you to the panel discussion as well. Can you just start giving us a background as to who you are and what your company does?
So here at FP McCann, we are the UK's largest supplier of precast concrete. We supply everything from drainage pipes through to manholes to £35 million student accommodation blocks. We're quite a diverse business that's grown over the last 5 to 10 years.
Thank you very much. So just starting off, we're obviously here talking about a gap in the industry between the whole design side of things and what actually happens on site. As being similar to ourselves in the fact that we're both providing a product or a system, if you like, to a client who's actually doing the build. We often talk about collaboration. What's your thoughts on what the barriers are or what this gap is on the collaboration in the construction industry generally?
I think there's a lot of contractors who've built very successful businesses by doing things in a certain way for a very long period of time. It's natural people get into comfort zones, don't they? Why should we change what we do? Which it's understandable. It happens not only in business but in life as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And ultimately, people are under pressure to deliver. Yes, it's natural to fear change. But the reality is change happens, and my view is we need to embrace that and ask what is actually changing. Is it a construction method? Is it an addition of innovation that's been incorporated into the scheme? Ultimately, the end result is the same. It's a successfully delivered project.
So in terms of the role of off-site manufacturing and so on, and one of the things which Mark Farmer's often emphasises the need of early stage involvement and engagement with supply chain and so on. But what do you think the role is of off-site manufacturing components, and what do you think you spoke there of the future and change? Where do you think that's going, Ryan?
I mean, I'd like to think it plays a massive part in the future of construction. I know over the last 12 months, there's perhaps been a realisation that the construction industry, we can still continue to build, but levels on site need to be and can be reduced, especially off-site and what we, FP McCann, can bring to the table. I mean, just as an example, one or two people don't know what we can do, but we combine facades, non-combustible insulation, the inner leaf of the structure, party walls, structural cores and slabs, and we build 20-storey plus buildings with 10 operatives on site.
So an interesting insight there, and similar to ourselves, we're taking a lot of the labour out of the site build process and you're bringing parts to site. But one of the things we find generally confused in the marketplace is that people's understanding of what is MMC or what's off-site.
Yeah.
Do you mind just, in your opinion, what do you think is actually, what do you classify as off-site and what is the benefits of doing it that way?
So I mean, off-site and MMC is interpreted by a lot of people in very different ways. I mean, contractors have been putting up precast concrete structures since the 1950s. Here we are today in 2021, and 1 in 100 new buildings are precast. I mean, off-site to me is everything from the full structure to the MEP, balconies. It's everything. It's not just the
volumetric side of things. You thinking that?
MMC is a bit of a buzzword at the minute. And what is a modern method of construction? And when you look at what we do, we've been doing it for 70 years. Yet it's just starting to come to the forefront of people's minds. People see off-site as volumetric and things like that, but it's not just about that.
No, so, and I think perhaps you refer back to the 50s there and the kind of, the prefab post-war homes.
Yeah.
And a lot of people think that kind of, it means boxes, it means lack of flexibility in the design, and perhaps this is one of the areas of the gap there between what people see at an early stage and what actually gets built there. But do you think that's the case in terms of the facades and stuff you're designing? Does it mean that you have to choose boxes and
Not necessarily, no. I think the precast industry and what we do has come on leaps and bounds since building concrete square boxes back in the 50s. I mean, we as an industry, we're now adding insulation, we're now adding facades, we're putting windows in panels off site. That's a massive change in mentality to deliver a PRS scheme, which has traditionally been an in situ frame, SFS, and brickwork.
So going back to the topic we were talking about earlier on involvement, how do you think early involvement and collaboration reduces the project risk and the cost overrun, or do you think that's not one of the benefits there?
No, I think it is one of the benefits. I think through collaboration, certainly my view is by collaborating with key suppliers and other key subcontractors on schemes, we're not only we're reducing the number of interfaces, or we're certainly boxing some of the key interface issues off, which obviously reduces the risk of error, reduces the time spent on resolving these challenges that may have arisen after the order, which both have time and program implications.
So you mentioned, and you can see from the picture behind you, Ryan, that facades is obviously a big part of that, likewise for ourselves. But in terms of your approach to collaboration, what does that involve in that external envelope area? And what is collaboration, and what's your approach at FP McCann?
So I think our approach is, I think we'll perhaps look at it as two different ways. So you've got the vertical collaboration, which is between FP McCann developers, architects, engineers, and contractors. This is where we discuss the benefits of offsite. We share the details, options, programs, methodology. And that side of the collaboration is about ensuring our system is correctly appraised against another, and ultimately ensuring we get a fair trial against other methods.
Yeah.
And then the other way I look at it is horizontal collaboration. I mean, I think it's equally as important to deal with other key subcontractors on schemes. I mean, we're talking to balcony suppliers, we're talking to MEP contractors, window contractors, crawler, tower crane suppliers. We're talking to these guys on a weekly basis. If we go to a meeting and we've considered the overall build, we've considered some key interfaces, and we've got them boxed off, and we can alleviate any concerns the contractors have had or do have, that, in my view, is successful collaboration.
Yeah, it's interesting. You must have plenty of good examples where you've had a company which is integrated well, both from a vertical and a horizontal point of view. I know at Sapphire Balconies, we've obviously worked alongside you on some of the schemes in Wembley and some other areas, but tell us a bit about a kind of a successful example of that, Ryan.
So one of the most recent examples where we have worked with Sapphire is a large facade project in London. Now through stage 3, both ourselves, Sapphire, the architect, the engineer, and the client have worked together to not only simplify the facade, but we've simplified the mechanical heating and ventilation openings. We've simplified the balcony connections. We've simplified the windows. Now, the benefit of that is the balcony now only interfaces with the facade, and through the parties collaborating early doors through stage 3, we've probably reduced 4 or 5 interface issues.
Yeah,
most of them would typically be dealt with on site, but we're dealing with them off site.
So when you're talking about reducing or dealing with an in-space issue there, you're talking about cost avoidance, aren't you? You're talking about designing out anchors, you're talking about designing out the risk and the things which were flagged up, I suppose, all the way through this, through the Grenfell inquiry as well. As kind of the interface where multiple people are dealing with something is one of the areas of risk. If you're taking it off site, you're reducing the quantity of them. It's a big benefit and a big risk reduction, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, the example we've used there, the initial thoughts were the in situ contractor would be casting in channels. We'd then leave a void or a penetration within our panel. Sapphire would then bolt the arms and slide the balcony on. Now, doing what we've done through stage 3 and collaborating with the team, we've removed that penetration through our unit. We've taken out completely casting channels from the in-situ slab. Again, all risk around tolerances. The penetration doesn't have to be sealed, doesn't have to be fire sealed. We just simplified the detail, reducing the risk and the interface detail.
That's good. Ryan, we're looking forward to welcoming you to the panel discussion where we'll answer some of the questions from the audience and tackle some of the other topics with others on the panel. Look forward to welcoming you to that, but thanks very much for your time so far.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. It's great to have you join us. If anyone has any questions for Ryan that we'd like to cover during the live Q&A session, please do use the Slido link below. I'd now like to introduce Matthew Bennett. Matthew is the Head of Innovation and Strategy at Wilmot Dixon.
Welcome, Matt. We're glad to have you on board with us, and I'm certainly looking forward to inviting you to the panel discussion as well, coming up shortly. Could you start off just introducing yourself as to who you are and what your company is, please?
Yes, so I'm Matthew Bennett, and I am Head of Innovation and Strategy at Wilmot Dixon Construction. So the innovation bit is a relatively new addition to my title. I've been working on strategy in the business for nearly 3 years now. And my job is to look kind of beyond the 2 to 3 years that construction businesses usually look, and to look 5-10 years ahead to what the industry is going to need, what it's going to look like, and how our business needs to adapt, what innovations it needs to develop in order to have a place in the market and to grow ultimately.
Yeah, interesting. So one of the things we talk about in the construction industry, one of the barriers perhaps for the future, is the whole gap between perhaps what's designed on projects, what's built on projects, or what's kind of initially envisaged and what actually happens. Where do you think the biggest gap is in, or what do you think that gap actually is, in your opinion, Matt?
I think that there are probably 3 big gaps actually. That there's the gap between the customer putting together a brief and making those key early decisions in the development process, and when a main contractor comes on board. Main contractors, through design and build, through frameworks, have become far more adept at and have far more to offer in the early stages of projects now, and yet we're still stuck in quite a rigid process of project management. So there's a gap there, I think, between customers setting up a brief and the sort of project scope and a contractor becoming involved. Then I think there's another one further down the line, again, between when the contractor's involved and then the supply chain engagement at the right time. I think there's a gap there. And then I think there's a gap between when the building is complete and then handed over to the customer for operation. And I think they're probably the three key gaps.
Interesting. So just pick up on the first one there in terms of the customer, the client of the actual building and so on. One of the things we've become very good at in construction is perhaps the price tender. It's a process we're all very familiar with and expect actually in the main. Do you think two-stage tenders is the route forward? Two-stage or not two-stage, if you like?
That is the question. I think there's a place for both, and it depends on the nature of the client and what they want to achieve. And often we have to respect that it often isn't the client's. It's often not their decision. It's often being driven by the people who are financing the projects. So I don't think we can sort of dictate what they should do. But I think there is a place for both. But I think it needs to be more integrated. And I think we need to acknowledge that while there are particularly with two-stage, I think the two-stage process is better. I think you ultimately get a better outcome from it, but it's not perfect. It's far from perfect, and it creates. In trying to solve one thing, it kind of creates other problems, and one of those problems it creates is there has to be competition in the process somewhere. There has to be a point at which you're making a decision on what you see as valuable. So there will have to be a comparison against other people at some point. And I think with two-stage tendering, obviously, we two-stage tender, and we select, okay, we'll maybe base it on prelim rates and things like that, and OH&P, and that carries its own dangers, because I think that's part of the reason that overheads and profits have been driven so low in the industry, because that's the only thing you're competing on. But what it also has led to is it's led to the kind of the competitive pricing element being dropped down a level to supply chain partners. So that just encourages shorter term working relationships with supply chain partners. It means when you compare it to other industries, I hate to use the car industry because it's a very, very tired analogy in construction, but those sort of manufacturing businesses where they are putting together long-term supply chain relationships to deliver things over years, it just makes that impossible. And I think not enough has probably been done to acknowledge that and find ways to mitigate it.
And what do you think the side effects of that are, if you like?
Well, I think there are lots. I think ultimately it has a negative impact on quality, simply because you are, again, mass manufacturing, it's all about repeatability, and it's very difficult to achieve repeatability and standardization if you're having to choose from 3 quotes every time and prove that such and such is more competitive than someone else. And that makes it very difficult. So I think quality does suffer. I think it means you can never really get a grasp of building performance, again, because you wouldn't build a car or design a car without input from the suppliers who are designing the parts for it, and you certainly wouldn't have a clue how it's going to perform until you put it on the road. And we're kind of in the same position, is that yes, you can design something, but unless you're integrated with your supply chain fully, you will have much less insight or experience even as to how it's actually going to perform. So yeah, there are lots and lots of things that I think it adversely impacts, but quality, I think, as far as the clients are concerned, is probably the one that really suffers.
Yeah, so it's easy, isn't it, with sending out pricing and getting back prices and so on, to compare purely the price, because it's very tangible to see 3 figures on 3 quotes and be able to say, okay, well, that one's the most competitive. And price competitiveness is obviously only one of the aspects, and part of that, I guess, you touched this a little bit earlier, was that kind of the longer term relationship and that transparency versus holding things back from a competitive nature point of view. And there's a healthy balance, obviously, but what's your thoughts on what makes a supply chain sustainable in the long term, and what are the key things which are actually going to drive that investment and the benefits in the innovation and so on moving forward?
I mean, yeah, looking with my sort of strategic goggles on, I think there will be, when you look at some of the things coming out from post Grenfell,
yeah,
and I was, I sat on the early adopters panel for about a year, and then you look at some of the, over the next decade, the fact that legislation on environmental performance will get higher and higher. I think that will drive greater liability over the performance of buildings, and I think that will ultimately there'll be a point where contractors who are ultimately taking the liability, and even designers as well, will start to push back against the procurement process and say, look, if you want us to be liable for these things and guarantee these things, whether it's fire safety is guaranteed anyway, but things like energy performance, then you can't expect that from us and want us to completely redesign our supply chain on every project. You can't have both worlds. So I think that will drive a lot of it, and I think at the moment, I think contractors or everyone in the construction industry is slightly scared and intimidated by that. But I think in time, as we become accustomed to it, we'll probably think, why haven't we done this all along? because we will just have much more certainty over what we're doing. So I think that's probably going to be the main driver of it, as opposed to sort of the notions of quality that we have today.
Yeah, so making a more balanced decision, perhaps you're kind of creating tangibles and being aware certainly of implications of kind of sustainability figures, or on the other end of things, the fire performance needed, or the different aspects of it, rather than just making it based on one aspect. Is that we?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you're saying that we're creating a building, or we have an approach, and if the buildings are our products, then we're saying that our product stands for this, and you can expect this in terms of how it performs, whatever. In the same way that a BMW stands for something. It's people, when they look at buildings, they ask who designed it. They very rarely ask who built it. But I think we may sort of see that shift, and productization of buildings is, okay, well, whose building is this? And so for Wilmot Dixon, what does a Wilmot Dixon building mean? What does it mean to be a Wilmot Dixon product? And I think as that becomes more of a factor, you will see that supply chains will get much, much tighter, because, well, for two reasons. One, you can't have, as I've said, you can't have that in sort of quality and differentiation on your brand without keeping those people close to you. But also, I think it won't work for either party to share ideas with other people. It's part of the reason that so little investment in innovation with the supply chain is, well, if I wanted to invest with a supply chain partner in something, it might work for that one project, but then they probably have to go and work with someone else on the next one. We, because of procurement norms and procurement rules in the industry, we wouldn't be able to sort of then use that person on every subsequent product. It makes it's tricky, but I think that's what
So some of the things you touched on there are what Mark Farmer identified in his Modernise or Die report of a few years back now, I suppose, in terms of actually being able to reinvest in innovation and things which will actually improve what we're doing, not just the way we've done, but for a cheaper price. And the one question I'd quite like to ask you, Matt, is what are Wilmot Dixon doing, which is actually paving the way to making yourself a more future-proof and proactive company in bridging that gap? What are the key things you are leading?
Yeah, I mean, we've made quite a few investments. I mean, I think it's sort of 4 or 5 years old now, but we started something we called the Yellow Book, which was a sort of first step into standardizing details, so that why are we designing kind of windowsill details every single time when we know what they are. They should be completely standard. We went through that process, and that's had a positive impact. But we're now kind of taking that to the next level. So that was quite an analog way of approaching that. We're about to launch in May, I believe, a new business as part of the Wilmot Dixon Group, which is focused on standardized design and design platforms, so that they are constituted of pre-designed elements which you can bring together, and depending what sector it's in, you can play around with them, a bit like with your IKEA kitchen, and construct a building. But it's all used pre-designed elements, so not modular boxes, but down a level to pre-designed elements. But everything's priced within it, and they have long-term supply chain agreements sat behind them. And we've got to find a route to market for that, because that's not the norm. And however great your idea is in construction, unless the rest of the ecosystem allows it to fit in, it's difficult to innovate. But we believe, we think that's the future. That has to be the future of design and construction. So we're investing quite heavily in that. We've invested several £1 million in it already, and we're very optimistic that that's going to be the future thing. So, and that kind of reflects, I guess, what we've been discussing. It's got those long-term agreements. It's got it's standardized. It's productized. They're all they're all built to Passive House standards, so they have industry-leading levels of sustainability. I'm doing the full sales pitch now, aren't I? It's but yeah, it's a kind of combination, I guess, of that work that was done through the Yellow Book to create something that's digital and that people can use a bit more themselves.
Yeah, I guess the added benefits of being digital is that you've got that easy decision making, which is more holistic than if it was just kind of dependent on you perhaps reading what's on a portal, or even without the portal at all, actually making decisions on your knowledge or education in the industry. But it's some really interesting points there, Matt, and we're very much looking forward to having you on the panel discussion shortly. Thanks very much, and we look forward to welcoming you to that panel.
Look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you for joining us today, everyone. I hope you've all had time to watch the interviews. We have some great content there. We've already had lots of interesting questions sent in through the Slido link. Please do remember, if you do want to ask the panel a question, if you scroll down to the Slido link, just input it there, and then I can read those and put them to the panel. If you've just joined us by Zoom, you can use the chat function just to add a question, or the question section, and I'll try to make sure I keep checking those as well. So firstly, thank you, panel, for joining us today. Thank you for your time on the interviews ahead of time, and again, like I say, for joining us today. And thank you to all of our audience for joining. We'll be starting the questions. So I'm just going to get the first couple of questions. I think some questions have been posed directly to individual speakers. Some are just a general question. So the first question we've got here was, how can we bridge the gap at concept stage without restricting options in design and making all buildings carbon copies? I think this one was actually aimed to originally at Katie.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we're considering, buildings and construction in particular, one of the ways in which we at 3Kit look to support our customers is by allowing for flexibility with design. So supporting architects, designers, as well as the sales teams, of course, to be able to collaborate on potentially different designs and different options. So, for example, if you were looking to have, a particular option that was one set of design, you could then, clone or duplicate some of those options, but make some minor adjustments for maybe a second design that you're looking to put together. So it's what we're looking to do is provide visual flexibility around configurability for a wide array of different options and designs. So giving a lot of flexibility to the architects and the designers.
Thank you, Katie. Matthew, did you want to add anything to that one?
Only really that I think I kind of resist the idea that standardization actually restricts like the ability for choice. People, I think when people talk about standardization and standardizing design, there tends to be this sort of like this vision in their heads of kind of communist era blocks in Eastern Europe of monolithic structures all over the place, and it's just not realistic. It's we are talking about standardization at a much more granular level than that. And when you get into things like kit of parts, it's about what you do with it that counts. I don't think anyone ever looked at a box of Lego and thought it restricted their creative capabilities. And it's the same for buildings. It's about what you do with the elements. 80% of what goes into all buildings is exactly the same, whatever sector, whatever you do with it. So yeah, that's kind of all I have to say on it. I just reject the idea that there's any issue there with kind of creativity and restricting of options.
Great, thank you, Matthew. Anyone? Tony, did you want to add? I saw you nodding away.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I don't think, like you say, I don't think standardisation restricts choice. I think we should be working around products that are utilised, tested, known. And going back to the manufacturers of choice, it doesn't in any way, to my mind, inhibit or stem creativity. I think what we are looking for is an element of repetition or repeating or standardization, not reinventing the wheel every time. That doesn't mean, as Matthew said, what you end up with is that kind of end product, but what you do end up with is an efficient, well-constructed, robustly designed building.
Great, thank you. Ken, did you want to add?
I think just really going back to what Matthew and Tony have just said, like it is components. You're standardizing components that you can make into whatever configuration you want of a building. It doesn't restrict creativity at all. It's just use those components in whatever fashion you want to use them in to create the design that you want and the desired effect, and that gives you a much more robust building, and the economies of scale have proven that as well. So I don't think it stifles creativity at all. Far from it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Ryan, did you want to add to that one?
Yeah, I think the team have hit the nail on the head. Really, it's about standardising components and then putting them together in a different way to form a different type of building, different shapes. That's what we ultimately try and do from our perspective.
Great, thank you. Luke.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Takes me back to a piece of work we did with Tony actually on the call here. We looked at quite a few broad spectrum of projects and just drilled down into some case studies really to try and get to the bottom of this. And what we found actually was missing was the creativity, but the missing part was the informed decision making, the lack of tools, if you like, as to what cost things or what actually cause complications for manufacturers. And often small tweaks for us to talk as Sapphire Balconies, often small tweaks. It may be the balcony is just 100 mil less or more in one direction, just means that suddenly we can get a standard balcony on there. It doesn't really mean that every balcony's got to be a carbon copy of each other. You can still get a lot of choice, but it's just there's this gap in the industry. I think that there's just a lack of informed decision making, and actually it would be, some of the tweaks would be very acceptable to the architect who wants creativity and very acceptable to the builder who still wants a good looking building but wants the cost benefits and it to be able to be delivered on time to a good quality, which it's a win-win-win really.
Nick, did you want to add to this one?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We touched on it in a few of the pre-interviews as well, but if we look at some of the standardised items which are mass-produced in the wider world outside of construction, you take a phone socket or you take a car seat connection to a car, for instance. So those are things which have been standardised as an industry to make it a lot simpler and easier for manufacturers and consumers. But does that restrict what phone charger you use or where you can use a charger for, or what companies? No, it doesn't. And it's the same with the car seat kind of industry. And there may be certain things which we really need to agree because it's a complex junction point, or it might be something which needs a particular fire stopping detail around it or something like that. There might be certain things you're fixing, but it's understanding what those important things are, and it really kind of pins back to what most of you said about early engagement and having those conversations to work out what those actual key principles are and parameters you need to work within.
That's great, thank you. So just moving on to the next question. So Ken, at what stage should we start collaborating to streamline the process?
I think I've been quite vocal in this previously, but I think after RIBA stage 2, I think all too often manufacturers and suppliers of materials and goods aren't getting involved until after RIBA 5, which is just way too late in the process. Manufacturing, I know we've got McCann's on here, Ryan on here, like they're the experts in this. Sapphire Balconies know their balconies and what configuration balconies can go into and how they can best support the developer at the REBA stage 2. So when you start developing the design brief at 3, you already know that these components work, and you've had that support from the manufacturers and the supply chain. So for me, I'll just reiterate, the earlier the better. We don't, as construction companies or contractors, we don't use the manufacturers often enough until the very last minute when it's perhaps too late. Architectural practices, they need to engage the manufacturers early on so that they can write up the correct specifications and the correct products and components are specified to go into that building. And I think part of the reason that we're seeing the change in the building regulations is because that hasn't happened. And this would negate things like that, you know, part B of the new building regs happening again, one would hope. So yeah, I think the earlier the better for me and for the industry.
Thank you, Ken. Did anyone else want to add to that question?
Yeah, can I? I think I've got a question later on. It's been directed to me regarding that. I think I wholly agree with what Ken's just said. From our point of view, stage 2, stage 3, let's get involved. What we do, we ultimately shape the facade and the structure. So as soon as we're involved, if we can then branch out and collaborate with MEP suppliers, balcony suppliers, window contractors, let's come up with a solution early doors to mitigate risk.
Actually, Ryan, I say, look, you did say we do have a question for you later, so I might just bring that one up now. It's just saying, what stage are you generally brought into a development, and what stage do you think you should be to maximise collaboration?
I think, going back to Ken's point, I think we need to be involved at stage 2, stage 3. A lot of projects we are brought in stage 4, which is probably getting a little bit too late. So there's often some design rework that needs to be done. No, stage 3 is ideal for us, really.
I would have said with that, Ryan, I mean, I categorise the engagement, and as you know, we like C3, our huge belief is about supplier engagement at the right time. I believe on the outside, we have to take it into 2 categories. You've got the external facade of the building, or elements that are sensitive to planning, and you need to deal with those quite early, that engagement, because often if you're coming then too late, and it can even be after the end of stage 2, you know, when you're then talking to getting involved, if you've already got a planning consent, you're somewhat restricted, you know. So I think there's that subtlety in my mind that you categorise elements that are sort of planning sensitive, whether that be windows, facade, treatment, external, that you need to get very early. Then actually the rest of it, as you develop the design, you can then work around. But I mean, I think we're advocates. We've got a huge amount of case studies from only what we've done personally, and obviously in the role at C3 now in our business of the success of early engagement. You know, I think there's cost efficiencies, there's risk reduction, there's buildability, there's speed issues. You know, we see it all. Now there is some caveats to that, and I'm sure we might catch on to some of those later. And there's some concerns that needs to be addressed in regard to competitiveness and sort of making those selections of who you engage with. But I think the concept is absolutely right.
Can I add to that, Kelly?
Yes, of course, Ken. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, why wait to stage 2? Because our experience really is you're trying to change a mindset. It's a different approach, and it doesn't just change in 5 minutes. Or even if a project's at stage 2, you can't necessarily change a mindset. There has to be an upfront decision, I think, from the developer or the business to go that route for that project, and even perhaps wider than just that project, but just say, look, we can see the benefits of collaboration. Let's start talking to people without even a project necessarily on the table, but how we get these principles embedded in our business, how it would work. And then obviously, as the projects progress or come out of that, there's already an agreement to embrace that collaborative approach. And you've made certain decisions before the project even kicks off, so that you're getting the full benefits of it. So earlier the better, but broaden it out rather than just looking at individual projects. Look at it as a business strategy.
Thank you, Ken. Sorry, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, as if we're getting the manufacturers involved too late at after stage 3 or even stage 4, then this concept of value engineering starts rearing its head, which for me is just poor design. and poor choice. And all too often, the value engineering costs are outweighed by the redesign and the time lost in redesigning those components again, or the area of the building in particular. So if you engage very early on and have the correct design brief, you won't have to get into that whole process of value engineering, so-called value engineering. And that's something I think that the industry needs to get away from.
Interesting point you make there, Ken, and Tony sort of alluded to it there as well, is that perhaps the current common thinking, if you like, is that the further down the chain you get, the more you can compare apples for apples later on, and that means that you're going to get a better price. Well, the fact is that the further down the process you get, the more things which are being fixed and the designs which are being frozen as you go through that stage, and actually it's all those hidden things which you're actually missing out on, which is often the bigger part of the picture as well, isn't it?
Thank you. Matthew, did you want to add to this one?
I think only really to emphasise, this whole discussion, it emphasises why we need more standardisation and why we need more repeatability, because we do need, the earlier the engagement, the better. But to do that on every project, where every project is treated like a prototype, is an inefficient process. So the more, we should be engaging with all these people from day one and having the expertise around the table, but that should then be captured, standardized, and then taken forward to other projects to really reap the benefits of it. I think that's why we're doing, that's why standardization is more efficient.
Thank you, Matthew. Katie, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So wholeheartedly agree. I think that the earlier that you can bring it to the table, the better. So what we're looking to accomplish, of course, is, I completely agree with Matthew, is to be able to provide that standardization, to be able to easily scale with all of those different options, combinations that are coming together. And it's not only one particular product set; it could be multiple product sets that are looking to come together. So obviously, with a large construction site, it could be very confusing, I guess, for architects and designers to bring all of those pieces together. So the earlier on, that you have those confirmed designs, an agreement with the actual manufacturers of those designs, the better the ongoing outcome.
Thank you. So moving on to the next question. This was an open question really to the whole panel. Are there any blockers at the moment that's really stopping us from closing this gap? Not sure who wants to go first. Nick, did you want to go first? Yeah.
Interesting. During the pre-interviews, there's many points made. However, we've touched on standardization and collaboration being some of the early ones. But I think the other thing which was mentioned in a few was really about a mindset and the looking at it being a risk or an opportunity to engage the supply chain. I'd be interested in others really potentially talk about something to do with that kind of that balance between one another.
That was my initial thought as well, Nick. So there's obviously there's one piece of the pie, which is technology potentially to be able to support collaboration and collaborative efforts, not only with different parties but internal stakeholders. But there's also maybe an education or a change of mindset from how things are being done today, and it's what tools or what mechanisms need to be required in order to change those mindsets. I guess it's an open question for everyone, but that was my initial thought as well, is changing the mindsets.
Matthew, do you mind if telling us a little bit about examples? I know when we touched on, we were talking a bit about volumetrics and so on, and that tends to be what the kind of offsite industry is automatically assumed to be, is entirely offsite, and the process being reality being different to that. And what kind of case studies and examples of best practice can you tell us about?
Best practice. I mean, the main kind of blocker to it, from our perspective, is the way the procurement process works. The procurement process for construction codifies a very inefficient way of procuring. And it means that the ecosystem kind of is designed to deliver buildings from inception to completion in, let's be honest, a very inefficient way. And so that's the biggest blocker for us, because we see a lot of technology, we see a lot of ideas, we see a lot of businesses like to get involved with, that we can't bring it to bear because it doesn't fit with the industry's definition of how things should be procured. So when we talk about mindsets, 100% believe that, but I often, maybe this is naive, but I think the people in this room, I think our mindset's already in that place. I think that a lot of the issue is with clients' mindsets and the people advising those clients of the best way to procure buildings. When it's worked well, case studies, we've done a series of hotel rollouts for a hotel chain, and we procured. It was procured once, so we procured a full rollout process of 6 or 7 hotels, and each time that process, we're not redesigning it from scratch. We're using the same components. We're probably not using the technology as much as we should be, but just the way the procurement process has been set up. Each of those buildings is around 5% more cost effective each time we do it. So there is that thing around sort of volumetric, but the volumetric issue is, and the reason volumetric companies tend to come and go like the wind is that they have a product that is valuable in some arenas, but they're trying to find a market fit that the market or the existing players in the market won't give it the space to do anything with.
Thank you, Matthew. It does kind of go into another question that we had. So like going on to the rest of the panel, is there a need for a cultural change to enable us to work better together? Ken?
Yeah, I think we need a huge cultural change. The lack of trust is something that's significant in this industry. I think that can be done via the contracts that we use. So the contracts that we use at the moment don't allow for trust, and they're very self-centered. So if we go along more like an IPD form of contract, which is an American integrated project delivery form of contract, or some of the new contracts, PPC 2000, which allows collaboration. A lot of the contracts we have, suite of contracts we have at the moment, talk about collaboration, but don't actually permit collaboration from inception to completion of the project. Just on the blockers, I would just like to say some of the blockers are the likes of the funders. So that's where it starts from. So the funding houses want lump sum or risk prices, and that doesn't lend itself to standardization or MMC or volumetric, and that's where we're getting some of the difficulties. So I think if we could do something around, as Matthew said, procurement and the contracts that we use, more open book contracts and more collaborative contracts, I think that would be a step in the right direction.
Great, thank you, Ken. Tony, do you want to add?
I think the mindset needs to start at the beginning. I think we've got a cultural massive shift today. We've been ingrained in us for the last 40, 50 years of, keep an open specification, don't name a product, go out to tender to 6, first past the post, keep the specification open. It's a behaviour that certainly for commercial people has been ingrained in us, and from generation to generation, from year to year, and it's a hard shift to break. And I think it's that mindset that you need to break of how you bring in that competitive tension and market rates you can do in a different way. People feel that you always have to go out to tender, and then decisions are often made too late and affordability is too late. Quite often people don't realise that they've gone over budget until they've got their tenders back and they need to place an order within 2 weeks. So I think we've got to shift that balance, and there is mechanisms in which you can bring in competitive tension early when you're selecting your supply chain partners to involve. And as Luke said, that might be a wider piece of work that you do across the business, but then you can choose your partners you want to work with, and then you can ensure you're getting the best price and that value, and then with confidence have them engaged in the design process. But certainly from our side of the business, and we promote it a lot with our clients, there's a big cultural shift in some of the contractors that we deal with, the main contractors. And as Ken said, one of the biggest challenges you have is the funders who are actually funding the work, which does somewhat stifle some of that sort of collaboration.
Thank you, Tony. Ryan, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest blockers we face is when engineers design and draw up buildings initially, be it schools, PRS, hospitals, they all come out as either a steel frame or an in situ frame. Now, I think one of the challenges we face is we need to be getting into the education, universities, etc., and talking to the up and coming, the younger generation around the benefits of off-site, and they'll take that with them into the working environment when they leave uni, and think about off-site. That's one of the biggest things we face.
Thank you, Ryan. Luke, did you want to add?
Yeah, I'm just going to pick up on what Ken said about trust, and I might have said it before in one of these events, but I like that quote from Stephen R. Covey. I think he's got a great little formula, which is where trust is high, arrow going up, then the cost comes down and speed goes up. So it's a successful formula, but it does need both parties, and I'd say it's not just a lack of trust, if you like, from developers and main contractors and clients to that, it's the supply chain as well, because we're in a difficult situation where with the threat of tendering, I suppose you could call it that, you hold back certain details, not wanting for everyone to benefit off your upfront work. But there does need a bit of a fundamental rethink. So there's a higher trust between all parties, really, that the upfront work and effort that needs to go in that ultimately can avoid more costs than you can ever save through tendering, I believe, does get taken advantage of, because at the moment we're just missing opportunities as an industry by thinking about it differently. And I'm interested, Ken, in your comments on those contracts. I'd be glad to catch up with you separately about that, because I've been looking at that as well. So
Great, thank you. Did anyone else want to add anything before I move on?
I was going to say, with Kim, going back to your contract point as well, we obviously saw a big shift 2009-ish, 10, away from traditional contracts and more design and build has been the sort of common thing more recently. With the Hackett findings and all the things which have been implemented off the back of that, and the new regulations and regulator and the gateways, do you think there's more of a likelihood that people are going to have to take more of nailing down those details earlier, more like a traditional contract perhaps might?
I think novating across the design team at stage 3 is not the right move, in my opinion. I think they should be retained until at least stage 4, 5. Why not carry the design process through to its successful conclusion? They are the people with the experience. They've developed that design with the support of the supply chain and the manufacturers early on. So it's a robust design, and it will eventually negate those requirements of what we're seeing with the changes in the regulations. I think, and going back to the trust thing, I think the general public have lost a certain amount of trust in the industry, given the adverse publicity we've had over the past 2 years and the recladding of buildings. So I think we've got to build that back up. Our contracts have to reflect that, and it'll be a much more collaborative approach. But yeah, I would retain the design team as long as I could. I would not be in support of novating them across. I think you lose that edge, and you lose all of the information and detail that's been built up during the first stages of the project.
Great, thank you, Ken. I think you might be getting a few phone calls about contracts coming up after that, so look out for that one. So moving on to the next question. Are there any new developments that's going to make it easier to collaborate that we can look forward to? I don't know who would like to take that one. Katie, do you want to take that one first?
I can certainly try. So I would say, certainly from, what we're seeing from a product visualization perspective is certainly being able to collaborate across different teams with all of the different variants that a customer might want to put together. So either the end customer, the architect, the designer, or indeed, the salesperson. So there can be a real strong collaboration across all of those different stakeholders. So yeah, I don't know if that helps to answer the initial question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Did anyone else want to add? I believe it's like said in a couple of the interviews, obviously with COVID, digital's been like quite pushed forward. So if there's anyone, Nick, I know that Coach is a big thing for Sapphire.
I come back. Matthew looks like he's just about to take part.
No, it was just I think away from the kind of the digital thing. I think there's part of my job is to look 5-10 years down the line and work out how Wilmot Dixon's going to need to adapt to emerging trends at the moment. And two of the big things I think will aid collaboration and that we need to get our heads around is first building on what Ken said in terms of the changing contracts. They are coming. They are preferred. If you look at things like the construction playbook that's just been released, they're talking about preferring that type of collaborative contract. And new emerging, there's now an NEC4 version of a collaborative contract. There's an David Mosey's FAC1 contract. And these are all around, however they're written, they're all around, they build trust by aligning the incentives of all the parties concerned. And that's what we don't have at the moment. The trust isn't there because the incentives of each of the players aren't aligned in the process. And I think that the more that gets specified, probably by the government at first, I think the public sector will have to take the lead on it. I think the more that will help collaboration because people's incentives to work in the interests of the client and the project and the outcomes of that project will be more firmly set in place. I think the second big trend that will help collaboration, certainly from kind of contractor level downwards or designers downwards, is increased productization of buildings. So we're looking at standardization, but that's very much around reducing costs, efficiency. That's an input. For clients, the output and the ultimate benefit is a more productized building where you are more certain of performance. You start to have, there's debates around, will we have branded buildings in the future, where in the same way you have branded cars, that they stand for something, that there is, it's about reputation, performance, and all those kind of things. To get there, you will have to have a much more integrated relationship with your designers, with your suppliers, to create those productized buildings, to have the confidence to be able to offer things like warranties, guarantees on buildings. Post Grenfell, that's going to be a huge thing of taking more long-term responsibility for the performance of buildings, and that's before you even get into sustainability. So I think that idea that buildings become more productized, and that you take you are your supply chain. And if you look at the car industry, when you buy a car from whoever it is, a BMW, you don't have to have a quantity surveyor sat beside you interrogating where they get their alternator from. Is that the lowest price? Where are the tires from? Is there a better one than that? Because the price is up front, because it's a product. You know what you're paying, you know what you're getting, and you have a point of comparison against what other people are offering. And as we move into productization, if we can sort those three things, then a lot of the aggro and the kind of adversarial contract relationships, they just won't matter. No one will care who delivers it for you. They'll care what is delivered and how it performs.
Yeah, maybe just to enhance my earlier answer based on what Matthew has highlighted here. So what we're seeing as a general trend across a lot of B2B organizations now is that the majority of end customers don't necessarily want to communicate with a salesperson straight away. They want to do a lot of their own research. They want to do a lot of their product information research. They want to be able to understand as much information as they can about all of their different options, variables, how things can start coming together and piecing together themselves. So the more information that you can provide, the better the outcome that is likely to have for your customer experience journey.
Just coming back to your question earlier, Kelly, on the Coach side of things. Coach, for those of you who aren't aware, is a software which has been developed by Sapphire, started way before Grenfell and so on. However, a lot of the things which we've been designing in and things like our passport quality system and so on are going to be mandatory steps moving forward into the post-Grenfell world of having a very closely traced history and so on. However, all those benefits and so on aside, you've got the other side of, I think you touched on it, Katie, in your interview, was that the ability to make rapid decision making at an early stage is what is enabled by having things digitally. And we've been pushed into a world, most of us working from home and so on for, well, pretty much a year now. And that has obviously accelerated the adoption of BIM and so on. But the industry, and from speaking with people, certainly the architecture end and specify end of the industry, is very much being taken up by this by the natural push into it of both COVID and the requirements of the new fire regulations. But it's actually also enabling the things which you're talking about, Matthew, of that decision making and the standardising the principles and so on behind it.
Thank you, Nick. Tony, did you want to add to this one?
I think I'll just I echo the thoughts of everyone really of where we've gone to. I think we've got a couple of more specific questions that drill into it a little bit later on as well, Kelly, don't we? Yeah,
I think so. Yeah. Cool. So we'll move on to the next question now. So when we're talking about collaboration, I've got a question here about who should be responsible for ensuring that all parties are collaborating. Where does this area fall, kind of thing? Is it an individual thing, or should there be someone overarching? Ryan?
I'll start with that one, Kelly, because it's something that's strong to my heart here. But I think it's got to start from the top. I think it's got to start from the client who's initiating the project, whether that be sort of government led or in the private sector, the actual client, developer, whoever that may be, because I think that sets the trend and the behaviour and the mindset through the whole scheme. Because you've got to brief the team correctly, you've got to appoint the team correctly, whether that be your professional and consultant team. You've got to create that mindset, and I wholeheartedly believe that. Where I've seen it work successfully, the client has been absolutely invested in acting and believing in that way, and that then filters down through the whole team and then works downwards and upwards in creating a successful outcome. Look, don't get me wrong, I think everyone in their own individual ways can achieve it, but I do believe it starts from the client.
Ryan, did you want to
I agree with Tony. I think it does need to start at the top. I think we're also, as individuals, as businesses, I think we're all equally responsible to collaborate with each other and go out and find a solution to successfully deliver the project to the client and promote upwards. So I was expecting it to start at the top.
Thank you, Ryan. And Ken, did you want to add to this one?
Really echo what Ryan and Tony have said. We just understand that collaboration is actually a behaviour, and it does come from the top. So you have to lead by example. And you as a client, you will pick those people or pick those teams or those organizations that will trust you and collaborate with you as well. So yeah, it really needs to start from the client. But we've all got to be open about it. And that's why I go back to the contracts again, to allow that to happen, and to allow the sharing of information, and the whole back to what Tony said earlier on about the procurement process. Get away from that, lowest common denominator, lowest price wins. There's a lot more value that can be added, and that's where the collaboration comes in, and the trust.
I mean, going back to my point, when I say it's climbing down, I do pick up what Ryan's saying, because having had an experience fairly recently where it was invested from the client down and everyone took that approach, unfortunately, one of the parties, and this is where where things can go wrong, and we do have the challenges, one of the parties who was brought in that we were actually looking to actively involve in the supply chain, unfortunately just reverted to type in their behaviours and didn't openly collaborate, and and were probably not as open and as transparent, and the trust and the sharing wasn't there, and their team looked to drive the number back the other way. So I think it's very important that you do make that selection and picking your partners carefully. And I think everyone has a responsibility to actually act and invest that in their own people and staff of how they behave. Because I think you're right there, Ryan. It can start from the top, but the businesses and each of us here have a responsibility to ensure that mindset is in your own business and with your own team, and that message feeds back through again as well.
Thank you, Tony. Matthew, did you want to add to this one?
Only to sort of come back to harp on about incentives again. I think, you know, it starts with the client, yes, because it needs to be structured in a way where everyone, you know, it needs to be structured in a way where it works in everyone's best interest. It's in everyone's best interest to collaborate. You know, it's got to be incentivized. I don't mean sort of bonus and perks wise, but structured in a way that it's win-win for everyone, because it is possible. I think, as you know, Tony's absolutely right. As soon as you create the conditions for any one of those parties that they potentially gain more from it being adversarial and not working collaboratively, unfortunately, they will take it. Or a lot of people will take it. So yeah, I think that's important. When you say sort of who's in control of making sure it happens, I don't think collaboration is something you can kind of coerce. I think you just have to set up the conditions where it's in everyone's interest to do so.
Great, thank you. Did anyone else want to add before I move on to the next question? All good? Okay, thank you. So the next one, we kind of touched on digital tools before, but the question was, are digital tools going to improve the gap from an early stage? Does anyone have any opinions on this one? Katie?
So I guess that will fall to me probably to tackle first. So yeah, I think I mentioned earlier that, you know, we're seeing more and more trends around, you know, businesses in a B2B environment looking to have more of a B2C experience for their customers. So, you know, that can obviously have lots of different ramifications, lots of different, you know, technologies that are going to be required to support that. But, you know, the area that I look to support is around visual configuration, which is particularly around providing an end customer, whether that is, you know, architect, designer, a salesperson, or the actual end consumer, with a visual understanding of all of the different variants that can be put together for that particular product. So, you know, that for me is fundamental, because the more information that you can provide around those different options, those different rules, is going to be really important. So, for example, if we use Sapphire as an example, you know, for part of their coach experience, we have provided a visual configurator around the balcony. So being able to parametrically change the size and what impact does that have on the construction of the balcony. Being able to change, you know, the height of the rails, the different fascias, the different options. So really allowing someone to immerse themselves in that design experience so that they can understand you know, what impact that might have on, you know, another area of the design of the construction that they're looking to support. So the more information that you can provide up front, the more collaborative that obviously is with all of the other different parties that you're looking to coordinate with. So that would be my my supporting answer so far.
I'm going to have to look up parametrically now, Katie. I'm going to have to use that somewhere now.
Glad we have a new word there today.
New word. I'm going to put in an email later. Yeah.
Perfect.
So touching back on your point there, Katie, and the question you asked initially, Kelly, there's kind of two parts to it in my mind. You've got the initial design of something, and if you're designing it rather than, as we've talked about already, and reinventing the wheel, if you're designing it from standard components, and that can obviously, the digital world can help with giving you what those are and what those parameters are, which is ultimately what the whole point of the configurations and tools like Coach initially start. But then that also enables it to go all the way through to manufacture. So anything you're designing by playing around with at an early stage is automatically cutting out a lot of the waste in that process. Obviously applying lean principles in doing so. The other side of it is you then get the later stages of a project, post-planning or something, may need to be changed because of whatever. It may even be the planning conditions change, and so therefore your balconies might need to be a different size or something like that. But it's that ability to manage that design change quickly and effectively, and actually, as we've said already, making that on informed decisions rather than just guesswork ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's ways, of course, that we can look to support design changes. So each kind of configuration will have its own unique URL. So if there is a collaboration between a salesperson and the architect or the designer, any kind of little updates can then be easily adjusted. So a new design can actually be collaborated on much quicker, rather than maybe it taking days, weeks, or even months to adjust.
I think one of the big benefits, Nick, when you talk about the coach, it's huge from an upfront early engagement perspective. But I think one of the missing elements that we forget is how that, like you say, if you get the software correct, can work all the way itself through to the whole manufacturing process as well. And if you can link the two together, which a number of businesses do, that's where you really start to drive some efficiencies. I mean, obviously, not just aside from balconies, there's a lot of work we've done on things like windows, and the whole window manufacturer works around that, where you're doing the size, design, best style, configuration, and that works all the way through to the cutting machines. And it's the same, and you're eliminating that risk as well, of things being redrawn and errors coming in. So I think there's a really clever play that we can do in bringing that digital platform in earlier, and it going right whole the way through the process. And then right the way through to the end, when it comes to replacements, building management, the life cycle of the building, when we talk about replacement components and parts, can be listed there as well. So I think we're going to see this digital platform be utilised a lot more going forward.
Absolutely, you touched upon a fantastic point there, and again, one of the other trends that we're seeing is an omni-channel experience across different I guess touch points in a journey. So from marketing, from an e-commerce experience or a commerce experience, from a sales experience, feeding that through into a manufacturing experience or output, supporting the actual designers of that once it has been put together in a configurator. And then you're absolutely right to be leveraging those same visual assets for spare parts or for replacement parts or anything in that component. So being able to follow that what I'd like to call the visual life cycle journey, if that makes sense. So you're seeing it from all the way from the start, from maybe a website experience, leveraging those same assets in sales, marketing, for collaboration across internal and external stakeholders, and then all the way through into like a post-sales experience and customer experience collaboration with supporting spare parts.
If you've been involved in managing buildings and dealing with the aftercare of buildings, that is a huge element, and it's one of the still missing areas that people struggle with, is that information flow. And I think that's where there's many other benefits, but the whole world around the digital, the tagging, the BIM will make a huge difference to that market.
Great.
I think as you point out, Tony, is that which is really driving there being a lot more adoption of BIM and so on. It's quite easy. A few years back, kind of architects in the main would probably have used DWGs and so on, adjusted the height of something, but there's so much learning which might have gone into a product being that height, not 10 mil bigger or smaller. And it's those sort of things which can make a big impact to the cost, or can actually affect other things, whether that's waterproofing, fire, and so on. And I'm sure it's not just balconies. I'm sure it's probably what you're doing as well, Ryan, and many other products out there.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, we, in terms of technology, we'll use Tekla. At tender stage, we'll produce a Tekla model, which we can share with clients and architects. They can then go away and box off any interface issues. That model then flows its way through the business as reinforcement added to it, and then Tekla talks to our machines within our factory to produce reinforcement, things like that. So we're trying to streamline our process from very early stage.
That's great. Thank you, everyone. So moving on to the next question. I've actually got two that kind of quite link quite well. Katie, what are the benefits of product configuration? And also, I've been asked, will product configuration, help reduce costs in the long run?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So they're kind of combined. So the benefits, first of all, around product configuration are that you're able to showcase lots and lots of different variants coming together visibly, so that you can actually see all of those different adjustments. So if we were to change, colors, finishes, sizing, adding different complementary accessories, etc., a single product option could actually end up being thousands or even millions of permutations coming together. And if you actually wanted to, use a traditional method of, photographing what that looks like, or sending samples of what those, options could look like, manufacturing those are going to be incredibly expensive, as well as logistically, very, very difficult, especially in the current climate where maybe salespeople aren't able to travel as much, or it might be, difficult to manufacture all of those different combinations and permutations. So really allowing to showcase all of those different variants is where this power around a configurator comes into play. Not sure if anyone else wanted to, maybe Nick, if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I think one of the things we should certainly bring it back to kind of the construction, the whole conversation of initial engagement and so on. I think to me it's that rapid decision making, as Tony touched on. It's then that the process is off the back of that as well. So whether that's shortcutting that process of pricing to be a rapid process rather than a sort of 3-week process, all the way through to then the structural calculations being done in the background, and the CAM programs and all the step files for machinery and all the rest of it off the back of it. But yeah, I think the enabler is having an easy to use interface which people can easily understand and can understand the relationship between different items, and be able to have the choice to use it originally, but likewise in all the inputs and the exports and what's often referred to in the BIM world as transactable data. I think that's only going to become ever more important as we go through into the implementation of the Hacker report of actually passing on data to, as you've mentioned, Tony, the property managers and so on at the end of that process as well. Yeah, and maybe just to add as well, there's, it's going to help with increasing time of communication. So, if I pick on another client of mine, so they historically used to do quite a lot of manual processes where they would create a design manually, and ping pong with different design options between the customer and the salesperson and the design team. And that process could take, 10, 11, 12 weeks, maybe to put everything together before you get to an agreement. So by actually having a configurator where a customer is able to go ahead, create their own initial designs and then have a collaborative effort with a salesperson, or even, a broader stakeholder group, that time of communication, number one, is significantly reduced, as well as perhaps time of conversion. So, that's another aspect to think about as well.
Yeah, I would echo that from our perspective. I think a lot of the cost savings of this, the configuration process, are around savings in terms of time and ease of doing business. I mean, don't forget that I think it's only just over 50% of the cost of a typical construction project is actually in the building. The rest of it is in all the other bits that go on around it. So, any way you can cut that down, and any way that actually empowers customers to actually be able to make better decisions. I think there's a tendency, we're as guilty of this as anyone sometimes, although we are actually investing, funny enough, in configuration technology, is we like to use technology to almost make things more complicated rather than less. It's sort of like, well, this is a great bit of kit, look how complicated it is. Surely you must have me around in order to tell you how to use it. And technology through history is only successful if it makes things simpler. and that then makes things more cost effective. It's got to empower the client or the end user. If it's not, then don't bother.
I love that. I love it. Yeah. The simpler you can make it for your end customers, the better the outcome it's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, we've done. I mean, and AI has a huge part to play in this. I mean, we've invested in some software, and like you were saying, doing an appraisal for residential developments on a piece of land would usually take, as you say, 6 to 10 weeks to do it manually. We can now do it if they give us the address of the bit of land and we can find it on Google Earth. We can use AI to run every possible development cycle on that, and we can produce it in about 10 minutes. It's insane. And this is where the benefit comes. It doesn't save you anything in the material cost of the building, but you've saved yourself 6 to 10 weeks of work and fees associated.
That's fantastic.
Luke, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just, if I put my Sapphire MD hat on and I'm trying to scale a business and grow a business, one of my constraints as we grow is skilled designers to develop product. And you can't pick them up off the street, and they require 15 months to 2 years of training before they're fully up to speed. And so we're investing in configurator software. And, that's, I think your question, Kelly, was about cost savings. Does they come out of using configurations? And I think that's where I get excited, because I can grow my business faster if people embrace and collaborate and start to use that technology. Because suddenly I can get through even double the amount of projects in a year with the same amount of designers, which is my constraint. So would I give savings to incentivize that back to my customers? Of course I would. That's where we start to get excited. And I think there would definitely, if we could get them all through the configurator, that's absolutely brilliant. I mean, we're still innovating and committed to bringing new innovations to market, but we've even aligning our approach with that to not just do it on a random or ad hoc basis for a project, but try to look at what innovations are going to be repeatable. How can I build innovations that the market needs, but with already thinking how this will go into a configurator in the future? So it's not restricting choice. You constantly got a new flow of innovations coming to market. But yeah, if you engage with our technology, that's what I would get excited about, passing some costs back for those that are working collaboratively with us.
That's great, thank you. I just had a question to come.
Sorry, Kelly, just one other thought in terms of what Tony was speaking about earlier. There's other ways, if you want to ensure market competitiveness, of doing that through the likes of benchmarking and analysis without having to tender every project. So you can get the confidence of the client and the commercial people that have got to make the numbers stack up. But at the same time, it gives them the confidence to collaborate, and we're all up for that. So.
That's great, thank you. We just had a question through to Matthew. Where do you see the first applications of 3D printing and more automation methodologies coming into the industry?
Well, that's an interesting one. I think any form of kind of new manufacturing processes in construction, I think residential is always the safest place to test it. Because it's small, you can do it at quite a small scale. It's a very well understood product. It's not particularly complex, so it's really that's the best place to start new technologies. And you look at what's happened with what we tried with offsite in the past. That it's tended to go down that route. I think the 3D printing one is really interesting because the whole potential to undermine everything we've spoken about, but I'll go with it anyway. If you look at kind of the theory behind standardization is from a manufacturing perspective of the more I can do of the same thing, the cheaper it becomes to produce, and the more efficient that process is. That's been around since Henry Ford invented the production line. What 3D printing does is it takes out economies of scale, because it costs exactly the same to produce one item designed once and produced once as it does to produce something that's produced 1,000 or more times. And I don't think, even in much more advanced industries now, people have really thought about what that actually means. So to take a completely unrelated industry, Adidas. Okay, Adidas have invested a lot in 3D printing. They actually do it through a liquid way, where it's almost like it's a really bizarre thing, where it's almost like a photocopier, and it just layers up the liquid and builds a trainer. It's incredible. And they now offer things where you can design your own shoe, and they'll make it for you. And it doesn't really cost any more than buying one. And that for me is probably 10 or more years away. But that for me is a real that could be an absolutely seismic shift in the way we do things. So I'm glad someone's mentioned 3D printing, because I've forgotten about it. But that's that could really stir the pot up. And to be honest, it's one of the reasons why Wilmot Dixon are, if I'm honest, we're sort of a little bit reluctant sometimes to invest in big capital infrastructure to build these things, because there's a scenario where those investments will not be valid beyond about 10 years time if you're looking at standardization. So in the short to medium and finding the efficiencies, but 3D printing could blow that whole thing wide open. So I'll leave it there. And as I said, undermine everything we just discussed for the last hour.
Thank you, Matthew. I did think that's quite an interesting question to end the board on. So maybe something for us to look into for future events and any way ahead kind of thing. So I have to get you back on that one. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today. I'd just like to give everyone an opportunity to just give us a closing statement. So if there's one bit of advice or one piece that you think is everyone should take home from today, what would that be? It's no particular order. I'm just going around how you are on my screen. So Nick, would your take?
We talk about collaboration, we talk about early engagement, and actually making a difference happens when that actually starts. As part of that, I think my key thought and takeaway really from the panel discussion is making sure that you're choosing the right approach and you're choosing the right partners, because getting that right is based on trust and based on the various factors we've been talking about. But choosing the right approach and choosing the right partners is my key thought.
Thank you. And Ryan, what would your take-home piece be?
I think we are actively promoting collaboration, and I think from a personal point of view, I think that's the way the industry needs to go to ensure change does happen. So from our point of view, we are happy to collaborate. If you're a developer or an architect, an engineer, let's just have a chat about how we can do that and how we can work with other key players in the industry to make things better on site.
Thank you, Ryan. And Luke, your piece be?
Yeah, I don't know how to summarise exactly, Kelly, but as I said earlier, I think there is. We've done a number of case studies and we've done some work with Tony, and we're very happy to share that with others. So if you're wondering how to get started and how some of the things we've talked about today in terms of how do I make sure something's market competitive without tendering, how do I close this gap where there are a lack of tools and information to make informed decisions even before something goes into planning, just get in touch, because we're happy to share that with you and maybe help you on that journey to taking the first step and actually trying it for once. If you're on the fence at the moment, we're happy to share some more case studies and findings with you.
That's great, thank you, Luke. And Matthew.
Well, I'd ended on my big crescendo already. I think one of the things is it's about thinking differently. I think we exist in a market where all of our clients, in terms of the developers and the people want them, are actually really clear about what they want to see. And as an industry, we seem very reluctant to give it to them. And I think a lot of that is because, and I find this in other organizations, but I also find in my own organization, is not being able to think differently about the way we do things, and not just from a practical on-site perspective, but the value we add, the way we add it, the way we make money, And I think if we're going to get collaboration to work, all of us need to think differently about the way our business models work, because it will come back to that. And we need to make this work. At the moment, it's difficult to make it work in the way we all do business. We all need to collectively make it all work. Otherwise, to be frank, businesses like Katie's will do us all out of the job.
Well, as it happens, I'm going to ask Katie next for her one. So, Katie.
Oh my goodness, no pressure now. So I think the key takeaway from my side would be to provide as much enablement as you can. So obviously from a configuration perspective, that's where my heart lies. But there are many other aspects to enablement and collaboration. So the more enablement that you can provide all of your different stakeholders, that would be my key thing for everyone to consider.
Great, thank you, Katie. And Tony.
I think Matthew's right in a way about it. I think you've got to go out there and make change happen. I think people are very comfortable in repeating and rinsing and repeat, as we're very good at in this industry of just, we still clay fire bricks and put them with cement mortar and put them on top of one another, and that's our main instrument of still cladding buildings. But, you've got to go out there and think differently and make change happen. So I think that's my comment. And when it comes to products and bringing in manufacturers, just remember that the architects or designers have to design around something. So why not influence what and who and how they design and the products that they use? I think we forget and think they won't be designing around it. They'll just be going back to what they've done before or utilising something they're comfortable with. Actually involve yourself in that process and get involved and disrupt that and make that change happen. That's where you make a difference.
Thank you, Tony. And Ken.
I was going to take Matthew's advice and invest in a 3D printer. It seems to be the way forward. Well, I think it's really sort of touches on what Matthew and Tony says. I think the earlier that we can get the manufacturers and the suppliers involved in this whole process, I think that it's will be more beneficial to the end product. It's about openness and trust. Let's start trusting each other. It isn't about lowest common denominator. It's not all about the money. It's about what value we can bring as well to that end product. So yeah, trust, I think. That has to be enabled by collaboration.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I'd like to thank the panel very much for joining us today and for your time on the interviews. It's greatly appreciated. And we've had some really good content, so thank you very much for sharing your experiences and your knowledge with everyone. Thank you to everyone that's attended today and watched our videos over the past couple of days. We did have a couple of questions we didn't quite manage to get to, but I will send those out to the panel and we'll put them up on the events page. So if you come back in a couple of days' time, you'll be able to see what their answers are, hopefully. We have put a poll up and we do value your feedback. We're constantly striving to improve on our events. So please do give feedback if you can. If you'd like to book a CPD or attend a future event, then please do go on to ResiBuild's website, and we've got all the information now on upcoming events. And yes, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.